I had been alive in my second body for 19 minutes. When a lawyer asked whether I preferred immediate bankruptcy or 3 wives, I remembered dying. I also remembered being Adrian Vale, a 24-year-old noble heir, whose father had left him Greybank Manor, 11 silver crowns, and roughly 1,600 crowns of debt. Across the table, Lord Garrick Vale tapped 3 old loan contracts. Each creditor branch could force me to choose one adult bride from its approved list. Accept all 3 marriages, and I received 9 months before foreclosure. Refuse one, and Greybank was gone today. Garrick smiled, as if he had already watched me lose. I checked the numbers once. Then I signed. Cold letters appeared where only I could see them. Family potential system activated. Eligible analysis limited to registered marriage candidates and members of the registered family household. I looked at Garrick's smile again. They had chosen these marriages to bury me. If the system was real, they may have just made their first mistake. That was how Adrian Vale's second life began. Not with a heroic quest, but with 3 creditor lists and a deadline. The first candidate list arrived before the ink on the contracts had dried. By then, Adrian had enough control over the foreign memories in his skull to understand the room around him. The dark window beside the table gave him his first useful look at his new face. He was lean, from months of poor eating, with black hair and one natural silver streak falling from the right temple, a sharp jaw, and amber eyes that looked brighter than the exhausted face around them. At least the body would be easy to recognize in a crowd. Garrick sat at the head of the long oak table, broad-shouldered despite his age, his iron-gray hair combed straight back from a narrow face. He wore dark green velvet without a thread out of place. Nothing about him was flamboyant. That made him more dangerous. He looked like a man who preferred documents to knives because documents left cleaner hands. 3 representatives from the creditor branches sat beside him. Their expressions ranged from bored to openly amused. Legally, the 3 loans still belonged to separate branches. Practically, Garrick had already negotiated a recovery agreement among them. If Adrian defaulted, Garrick's branch would take title to Greybank, pay the other 2 branches fixed settlement shares, and keep the bridge, mill, and surrounding land. That was why Garrick chaired the hearing, even though he did not personally own every crown of the debt. A clerk placed the first list in front of Adrian. 12 women from the eastern villages. All adults, all poor, no dowries. Most had families eager to reduce the number of mouths under their roofs. The old Adrian would have known only the small notes written beside each name. Farm laborer, washerwoman, shepherd's daughter, widow's niece. One woman had a damaged hand. Another was described as sickly. A third had been dismissed from 2 households for arguing with supervisors. The system showed more. Adrian focused on the first name. Main hidden talent, household management. Maximum potential, D. Current realization, 41%. Main obstacle, limited resources. Next unlock condition. Manage a household of 10 or more people for 1 season. The next candidate showed weaving, C rank. The next showed animal handling, D rank. Useful people. The system did not call every person a genius, simply because Adrian needed one. That made the 4th entry much harder to ignore. Mara Thorne. Main hidden talent, agriculture. Maximum potential, SSS. Current realization, 0.8%. Main obstacle, chronic undernourishment and lack of authority over the land she works. Next unlock condition, fully restore and independently cultivate 1 damaged field to a viable harvest. Adrian read the panel twice. Then, a 3rd time. Garrick's nephew Corvin, who had been standing near the window purely to enjoy the humiliation, gave an exaggerated sigh. If the choices trouble you, cousin, I can recommend Miss Thorne. No family connections, no dowry. I am told she can work from sunrise until dark, as long as you remember to feed her. Very economical. A few people laughed. Adrian kept his face blank. Mara Thorne, he said. I choose her. The laughter became louder. The second branch produced another list. Adrian went through it more carefully now. forcing himself not to rush. E rank, C rank, D rank. 1. B-ranked talent for bookkeeping. Attached to a woman with 2 dependent younger brothers and a creditor who would follow her into the marriage. Then he found Leora Pell. Main hidden talent, alchemy and medicine. Maximum potential, SSS. Current realization, 0.5%. Main obstacle, rote instruction incompatible with her analytical learning pattern. No independent workspace. Next unlock condition, diagnose a real illness and create an original treatment adjusted to the patient. The note written by ordinary hands beside her name said something very different. Failed apprentice, dismissed from charity infirmary. Unreliable with standard formulas. Adrian chose her. One of the branch representatives actually asked whether he was certain. You were kind enough to offer the list, Adrian said. It would be rude not to trust your judgment. Corvin snorted into his wine. The third list contained laborers, former camp followers, a cooper's daughter, 2 women who had served as guards, and 1 young widow whose family wanted the marriage because they hoped Adrian could support her child. Adrian examined every entry. Kaya Ven appeared near the bottom. Main hidden talent, martial arts. Maximum potential, SSS. Current realization, 1.1%. Main obstacle, no technical foundation. Poor recovery. Training history based on labor rather than combat development. Next unlock condition, receive structured fundamental instruction and demonstrate control under live pressure. The written note described her as unusually strong, unschooled, difficult, and without property. Adrian selected her. For the first time that morning, Lord Garrick's gaze sharpened. Not because he knew what Adrian had seen. He could not. But 3 choices had been made with too little hesitation. You understand, Garrick said, that all 3 households become your responsibility from today. Food, shelter, legal protection, and any debts they personally declared in the contracts. Greybank's own obligations remain unchanged. Your first installment is due in 30 days. I understand. And the final balance in 9 months. I can count to 9. That earned no laugh from Garrick. Adrian liked him slightly less for that. The women were brought in before noon. Mara Thorne entered first. She was 23, smaller than Adrian expected. Not fragile so much as worn thin by years of work that had never quite produced enough food. Her long copper-red hair had been pulled into a thick braid tied with plain cord. Some freckles crossed her nose and cheeks. Her moss-green eyes moved quickly over the room, the contracts, the men in expensive clothes, and finally, Adrian. Her hands were rough, with small healed cuts across the knuckles, and soil still lodged beneath one thumbnail, despite obvious efforts to wash clean. Leora Pell came next. At 22, she looked like trouble had learned to walk upright. She had short teal-blue hair cut unevenly around her jaw, violet eyes that refused to stay on one object for more than a few seconds, and ink stains on 2 fingers. While the clerk explained the ceremony, she became visibly distracted by the composition of the sealing wax. Kaya Ven entered last. She was 25, as tall as Adrian and much broader through the shoulders. Ash-white hair rested at her shoulders, tied back only enough to keep it from her face. A thin scar crossed vertically through her left eyebrow. Her dark red eyes met Garrick's, moved to Corvin, then to every door in the hall, before settling on Adrian. She stood like a caravan guard, even in a borrowed gray dress, weight balanced and hands loose at her sides. Nobody could have mistaken the 3 women for one another. Nobody in the hall looked impressed by any of them. The ceremony was short because nobody wanted to spend money making it long. The law did not allow a creditor branch to drag an unwilling adult into a marriage, so every woman on the candidate list had previously signed the branch marriage registry and could still refuse the specific match before the final seal. Poverty had made that choice narrower than the paperwork suggested. Mara had entered the registry because a registered household meant regular food, shelter, and legal protection she had never possessed while moving between seasonal farms. Leora had entered after her dismissal left her with no workspace of her own and almost no path back into medicine. Kaya had chosen the registry rather than sign another long caravan labor contract that could bind her for years. They had agreed to be candidates. None of them had chosen Adrian before that morning. The clerk therefore asked each woman separately whether she accepted the contract in front of her. Mara studied Adrian once, then said yes. Leora read the property and exit clauses twice before signing. Kaya asked whether refusal created any debt or penalty. When the clerk said no, she looked at Adrian, then signed as well. 3 simple iron rings were produced from a small box. Mara accepted hers without expression. Leora turned hers over to inspect the workmanship. Kaya asked whether the ring had any legal significance beyond identifying the marriage. When told it did not, she put it on and seemed satisfied. Adrian's system updated each time a registration seal was stamped. Registered family household confirmed. 3 SSS panels remained visible whenever he focused on his new wives. They were real. His relatives had spent months assembling candidate lists designed to offer him the least financially advantageous marriages they could legally force him to choose from. In doing so, they had somehow placed 3 people with talents rare enough that the system ranked them at the top of its scale within his reach. The important part was that none of the panels said miracle. Mara could not touch dead soil and make wheat erupt from it. Leora did not know every medicine in the world. Kaya was not secretly capable of cutting a knight in half. Potential was not achievement. Adrian found that reassuring. Miracles were difficult to budget. People could be fed, equipped, trained, and given room to work. Greybank Manor was worse than the memories had suggested. The 4 of them arrived late that afternoon in a hired wagon that Adrian regretted paying for, until one wheel hit a hole deep enough to throw Leora against Kaya. Kaya caught her with one arm and did not even shift in her seat. The estate sat where a narrow river left the hills and spread into a shallow valley. In better years, the position must have been excellent. A stone bridge crossed the river just below the manor. The road that used it was quiet now, but the bridge itself was solid. Beyond it stood the shell of an old watermill. Fields stretched in long, neglected strips on either side of the road, many half-flooded from spring runoff and others choked with weeds. The village had perhaps 20 houses still occupied. More stood empty, with broken shutters. Smoke rose from only a few chimneys. The manor itself had 3 floors, if one counted the section where the 3rd floor had partially become the 2nd. Old Tobin, the remaining steward, greeted them at the gate with the solemnity of a man apologizing for a funeral. His wife, Nell, managed what remained of the kitchen and laundry. They were both past 60. They were also the only paid household workers left, except that Adrian had not actually paid them for 6 weeks. He learned that fact before he reached the front door. "I will settle what is owed," Adrian told Tobin. The old steward bowed, but his eyes suggested he had heard promises before. Inside, the manor smelled of cold stone, damp wood, and old soot. Furniture had been sold room by room over the previous year. Dust outlined the places where cabinets had once stood. Adrian decided to begin with optimism. "At least we will sleep properly tonight." He opened the door to the best remaining bedroom. A section of ceiling plaster detached itself, struck the center of the bed, and brought half the canopy down with it. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Kaya looked at Adrian. Leora leaned around his shoulder and surveyed the wreckage. "Is this the noble luxury I was promised?" "Nobody promised you luxury." "Then your family has excellent legal instincts." Mara had already stepped into the room. She picked up one of the fallen boards, tested it with both hands, and put it aside in a neat pile. "These 3 are still good," she said. Adrian looked at the destroyed bed, the hole in the ceiling, and his first wife's salvage pile. He respected her immediately. By sunset, they had found 2 small bedrooms that were dry enough for the women, one narrow room for Adrian, and a dining room with a table sturdy enough to survive negotiations. The bedrooms had only 2 usable mattresses between them. Kaya offered to sleep on blankets on the floor without hesitation. Mara insisted she could do the same. Leora suggested cutting one mattress in half, then admitted she did not know how mattresses were constructed. Adrian solved the argument by assigning each woman a room and using the dining room himself until they could repair more furniture. You own the house, Kaya said. There is one surviving bed in the west room. There are 3 of you and 1 of me. Also, I have seen that bed. It is making sounds while nobody is touching it. I do not trust it. Kaya considered that and nodded as though he had made a tactical point. After dark, Nell served thin barley porridge with onions and the last piece of smoked fat in the pantry. It was not enough for 4 young adults, but it was warm. Adrian waited until everyone had a bowl before laying the marriage contracts on the table. Mara stiffened slightly. Leora stopped examining a crack in her spoon. Kaya watched him without moving. He had spent the wagon ride deciding how much to say. Charming speeches would be useless. Creditor law and poverty had funneled 3 strangers toward a bankrupt man none of them knew. Trust, built from promises alone, would be worth exactly what Greybank's treasury contained. Almost nothing. So Adrian kept it simple. He told them that the marriages were legally real, but he would not demand romance, a shared bed, or obedience outside matters necessary to keep the household alive. Food would be divided evenly. Earnings created by their work would not disappear into his pocket. If they survived the 9 months and cleared the debt, he would put their rights in writing, and each could leave if she wished. For now, he wanted one thing from them: help him make Greybank profitable. Leora tilted her head. You say that as if this building is not attempting to kill us. The building is our first hostile investor. Mara lowered her eyes to her bowl, but Adrian saw her thumbs stop rubbing the edge of the iron ring. Kaya asked the only question that seems to matter to her. If one of your relatives comes here and orders me to leave with them, they can produce a valid court order, or they can enjoy the road back. If they bring armed men, Adrian looked around the room. They owned 2 kitchen knives, 1 wood axe, a rusted hunting spear, and a door that did not close completely. Then I would prefer they wait a few months. The corner of Leora's mouth twitched. Kaya did not smile, but she accepted the answer. The first proof that Adrian's system was more than an impressive label came before breakfast the next morning. Mara had risen before everyone except Nell. She found the remaining sacks of grain in a side store and asked why one had been marked for disposal. Tobin explained that moisture had entered through the wall. The grain smelled musty and had begun to clump. They had assumed the whole sack was spoiled. Mara crouched beside it for nearly 10 minutes, separating kernels between her fingers. She smelled them, cracked several open with her thumbnail, and asked for a flat board and 3 clean cloths. She did not perform magic. She sorted. The upper layer was useless. The dampest clumps near the wall had begun to mold. But most of the center remained dry enough to save, if spread thin, turned repeatedly, and cooked soon. She then inspected 2 other sacks, and found early weevil signs in one that nobody had noticed. By noon, grain lay across boards in the warmest surviving room. Mara had also rearranged the stores so nothing touched the wet wall. Nell estimated they had gained 5 or 6 days of food that would otherwise have been thrown away. 5 days was not wealth. 5 days mattered when the pantry could see its own floor. Adrian focused on Mara as she tied her copper braid higher and carried another board toward the window. Agriculture, SSS. Current realization, 0.9%. The number had moved, very slightly. He smiled. Mara noticed. What? Nothing. I just discovered we are less poor than we were this morning. By 1 sack of barley. At Greybank, that currently qualifies as economic growth. She looked at him for a moment, then went back to work. Her expression barely changed, but he thought she was hiding the beginning of a smile. That afternoon, Adrian placed every coin he owned on the dining table. 11 silver crowns, 38 large copper pieces, a scattering of small copper bits. Tobin added the estate accounts. The first mandatory debt payment in 30 days required 120 silver crowns. The total principal was roughly 1,600 silver crowns. The first installment would reduce that balance to 1,480, and the old contracts froze further interest during the 9-month recovery period, as long as every scheduled payment was made on time. The room became quiet. Leora counted the coins herself, perhaps hoping arithmetic would improve under observation. Kaya asked what could be sold. Mara asked how much seed remained. Those were the right questions. Tobin also produced one document Adrian had not seen at the family hearing. A preliminary notice from the Royal Roads Office. Surveyors planned to expand the East-West Trade Road the following year. And Greybank's Stone Bridge was one of the few crossings already strong enough for heavy wagons. If the route was approved, toll rights, mill traffic, and nearby land values would rise sharply. Garrick was not merely scavenging a bankrupt cousin. He was waiting to inherit a future gate on a royal trade road. Tobin added another useful fact. If Adrian died before foreclosure was formally completed, Greybank would pass into temporary crown custody while succession was reviewed. Killing him would delay Garrick's claim and might invite royal scrutiny. Garrick needed Adrian alive and legally ruined. The distinction did not make Adrian safer, but it explained the shape of the threat. Adrian pushed the coins into 3 small stacks. First, we make sure nobody here starves. Second, we create something people will pay for. Third, we make it difficult for anyone to take it from us. Leora pointed at the 3rd stack. How much is that one? The future. It is 4 copper. The future is underfunded. For the first time, Mara laughed. It was only a short breath through her nose. Gone almost immediately. Adrian considered it Greybank's second profitable result of the day. Mara asked permission to inspect every field attached to the estate. Adrian slid the account book aside. You do not need permission to look. I want your judgment. Her green eyes lifted to his. That simple sentence affected her more than the marriage ceremony had. She nodded once. At dawn the next morning, Mara Thorne walked out with a shovel over one shoulder. Adrian beside her, and the future of Greybank hidden somewhere beneath several hundred acres of mud, weeds, and bad decisions. Mara spent the next 2 days proving that a field could be ruined in more ways than Adrian had imagined. The eastern strip was waterlogged because the drainage ditch had collapsed under 2 winters of silt. A south field had been planted with the same grain for so many seasons that even Adrian could see the soil was exhausted, though Mara explained the problem with much more precision. The vegetable plots near the village had been placed where spring shade from an alder line delayed the morning sun. Seed grain had been stored too warm. One abandoned pasture was nearly useless for grain, but surprisingly good for beans. If they could break the compacted surface and repair a spring channel farther uphill. She carried a small knife and cut into soil as if examining a patient's wound. She tasted water from the stream, watched where meltwater pooled, and asked old villagers what had grown well before Adrian was born. At first, they answered because he was the lord of the estate. By the second afternoon, they were answering Mara. She never pretended to know what she did not. When an old farmer named Jory claimed the northern slope used to produce excellent rye, Mara walked the entire boundary before telling him the slope had not failed because the soil was poor. The retaining bank above it had cracked years earlier, allowing heavy rain to strip the dark upper layer downhill. Jory stared at her muddy boots. My father said the ground was cursed. Mara pointed to the broken bank. Your father did not own a shovel? Adrian turned away so the old man would not see him smile. The system panel changed after the survey. Main obstacle, chronic undernourishment. Insufficient independent tools and labor. Next unlock condition. Fully restore and independently cultivate one damaged field to a viable harvest. The problem was that understanding had never made anything cheaper. He returned to the manor and ordered a full inventory. The process was humiliating, but educational. The Vale family had somehow gone bankrupt while still owning 6 silver candlesticks, a ceremonial serving set nobody had used in a decade. 3 carved chairs too delicate for ordinary people to sit on, a velvet wall hanging depicting an ancestor hunting a white stag, and a set of riding tack decorated with brass medallions, despite Greybank owning only 1 mule. The mule's name was Turnip. Turnip had survived the estate's decline by developing a deep suspicion of work. Adrian sold the candlesticks, the serving set, the velvet hanging, 2 chairs, and nearly all the decorative tack. He kept every shovel, saw, hammer, plow part, grain bin, rope, cartwheel, and piece of mill equipment they found. Corvin Vale's agent offered a poor price for the silver and an excellent price for the millstones. The agent asked again about the millstones. "They are ugly," Adrian said. "I have become attached to ugly things." By the end of the sale, Greybank had 67 additional silver crowns. Mara wanted to spend almost none of them. Adrian wanted seed, drainage tools, nails, lime, lamp oil, basic medicines, enough food to stop everyone looking like they had been recently rescued from a shipwreck, and one small personal luxury. He announced the plan at breakfast. "Today," he said, "we are buying luxury goods." Leora's violet eyes brightened. Kaya actually looked curious. Mara's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. Adrian returned from the nearby market town with 4 proper pillows, 4 metal spoons, 1 sturdy door lock, a new wool blanket, and a smoked leg of pork. Leora stared into the wagon. "Where are the luxury goods?" "You are looking at them." Mara picked up 1 pillow and frowned at the stitching. "How much?" Adrian told her. Her expression became severe. "We had folded blankets. We had objects that used to be blankets. One of mine contains a twig. You could remove the twig." Kaya carried the new lock to the front door, set it against the frame, and tested the wood with 1 pull. The rotten board came away in her hand. Everyone looked at it. Adrian took the account list from his pocket and added a line. "New door." Leora quietly took 2 of the 4 new spoons. He noticed. "Why do you need 2? I may need to measure something." "Use a laboratory spoon when we own a laboratory. Then, this purchase is an investment in future laboratory capacity." Adrian looked to Mara for support. Mara was still calculating the cost of the pillow. He looked to Kaya. Kaya was holding the broken section of door, like evidence in a murder case. That was the day Adrian understood that being head of the household did not guarantee command of the household. The more important purchases went to Mara. Seed for quick spring greens and radishes, peas and beans, a modest amount of barley seed from a neighboring district because Greybank's remaining stores were unreliable. New hoe heads, 2 spades, a narrow wheelbarrow, lime for the sour patch near the spring, salted fish and oats for the workers. Mara argued against the amount of food, until Adrian asked whether weak laborers repaired drains faster than fed ones. She had no good answer. He bought the food. Then came the labor problem. Greybank's remaining villagers had learned not to trust promises from the manor. Adrian's father had borrowed heavily, paid late, and demanded more labor as money disappeared. Some families had left during winter. Others had stopped sending anyone, except when legally required. Adrian could not afford wages for 10 men through the month. So he called the village heads together outside the old mill and made a different offer. Anyone who helped restore the first field would receive meals during the work and a fixed share of the first saleable produce, measured by basket. The agreement would be written. If the field failed, Adrian carried the loss on seed and supplies. If it succeeded, the workers were paid from the result before his own share. Jory scratched his beard and asked why any lord would put that in writing. "Because I cannot afford to pay you enough to believe me verbally." That earned a few uncomfortable laughs. 4 men and 2 women agreed on the first day. 3 more joined after Nell began cooking thicker midday stew from the food Adrian had bought. Mara organized them with a quiet certainty that grew every hour she was allowed to decide for herself. She did not shout. She marked the drainage line with stakes, assigned 2 people to clear the spring channel, put stronger workers on the collapsed ditch, and sent children gathering stones from the planting bed in exchange for bread and a copper each. Adrian spent mornings working beside them when his accounts allowed. He learned quickly that knowing the purpose of a drainage ditch did not make digging one pleasant. His palms blistered. Kaya worked like a machine until Mara told her she was moving too much wet earth at once and would injure her back. Kaya looked offended by the concept. "I have carried heavier." "Badly," Mara said. Kaya stared at her for several seconds, then reduced the load. Leora tried field work for half a day, became fascinated by a patch of bitterleaf growing near the ditch, Mara found her 3 hours later. Leora returned carrying weeds and explaining that one leaf smelled different after bruising. Adrian assigned her to inventory the manor's old medical cupboard instead. By the second week, the first field looked like land rather than an abandoned argument with nature. The drainage ditch ran. The spring channel delivered clean water where Mara wanted it. The soil had been turned and broken. Beams went into the rougher section. Quick greens and radishes went close to the house. Barley filled the largest strip. Mara chose smaller test rows for different seed depths because she wanted to see what Graybank's spring soil preferred. The system showed her realization at 1.4%. No fanfare came with the increase. Mara simply began noticing more. She caught a pale discoloration on 2 bean leaves before anyone else considered it significant. She changed watering around that section, removed through plants, and later found small root damage beneath them. She shifted the next row half a pace farther from the wet edge. Her choices remained understandable after she explained them. The strange part was how quickly she reached the right choice. Adrian could finally see what SSS meant in practice. Mara's mind wasted almost nothing it learned, and each correct result made the next decision faster and more precise. The wild boar arrived on a wet night near the end of the 3rd week. Adrian woke to shouting from the field and the sound of wood breaking. He rolled from his blanket beneath the dining table, hit his shoulder on the underside, swore, and reached the front yard, just as Jory's eldest son came running up the path. A large boar had pushed through the temporary fence near the beans. For hungry Graybank, that was not merely an animal in a field. It was 3 weeks of labor, about to be destroyed in an hour. Kaya reached the gate first. She had the old hunting spear in both hands, and wore boots, trousers, and a shirt thrown on without fastening the top buttons. Her ash-white hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. "Wait," Adrian said. She did not. The boar burst from between 2 rows before they reached the fence. It was enormous, mud-black along the shoulders, with 1 broken tusk and enough weight to knock a grown man sideways. Kaya planted the spear the way an untrained caravan guard might have seen someone do before. Her courage was excellent. Her angle was terrible. The boar struck the shaft off-center. The spear point cut its shoulder but did not stop it. Kaya was thrown backward into the soft edge of the ditch. The animal turned, furious now, and charged again. Adrian had already seen the narrow lane between the field fence and an overturned farm cart. Kaya left into the lane. She rolled to her feet and moved at once. The boar followed her. Adrian grabbed Jory's son by the sleeve and sent him for rope. He shouted for 2 men to get behind the overturned cart and for another to bring the wood axe. Kaya retreated through the gap, using the spear shaft crosswise to keep the animal's head away from her legs. She moved fast, but the boar was stronger than anything she had fought. Its tusk caught the spear shaft and tore it from her hands. Kaya staggered. Adrian shoved the loose wheelbarrow down the lane. It hit the boar's front legs, not hard enough to injure it, but hard enough to make it hesitate and climb over the frame. Kaya used the heartbeat to get behind the cart. Now, 3 men heaved. The cart tipped farther into the lane. Its heavy side rail struck the boar and forced it toward the drainage trench Mara had insisted on deepening 2 days earlier. The animal scrambled, found no footing on the wet edge, and slid shoulder first into the ditch. The ditch robbed the boar of speed, just long enough for the rope to matter. Jory's son returned with rope. Adrian looped one end through the rear axle of the cart and told the men to pull across the ditch. Kaya understood before he finished speaking. She seized the other length, jumped the channel, and threw a loop toward the boar's rear leg when it tried to climb. The first throw missed. The second caught. The boar surged upward, almost dragging her into the trench. Adrian and 2 villagers hauled from the opposite side. The rope tightened, twisting the animal's hindquarters just enough to break its charge. Jory came in with the wood axe. He struck once behind the ear. The boar collapsed into the mud. For several seconds, nobody moved except to breathe. Kaya stood with both hands on her knees. Mud covered one side of her face. A red scrape ran along her forearm, She looked at the dead animal with an expression more severe than fear. Adrian knew what bothered her before she spoke. She had expected strength and nerve to be enough. Later, after the meat was cleaned and every villager involved had received a share, Kaya found Adrian behind the manor, wrapping his blistered palms. "You said you can tell what people are good at." It was the first time she had referred directly to the strange certainty behind his choices. Adrian had never explained the system. He had only told each woman that he believed she had unusual potential. Kaya stood across from him with the repaired spear shaft in her hand. "Then tell me what I lack." Adrian considered softening the answer. Kaya would hate that. Everything except talent. Her red eyes narrowed. He continued before she decided whether to hit him. She lacked footwork, breath control, distance judgment, recovery habits, proper guard positions. She had strength because she had worked since childhood, and instincts good enough to keep her alive as a caravan guard. The system said her ceiling was extraordinary. Her present ability was not. Kaya looked toward the field, where the boar had nearly killed her. Can that be fixed? Yes. How? With someone who knows what they are doing. Which means I need more money. That finally pulled a small sound from her, half laugh and half disbelief. Everything comes back to money with you. Food, roofs, swords, teachers. I have searched for a cheaper universal solution. Money remains annoyingly effective. From then on, Kaya trained every morning with whatever she could use. She ran the estate road. She practiced steps Adrian found in an old militia manual. She lifted stones in controlled sets after Mara threatened to ban her from fieldwork if she injured herself. The movements were crude, but Adrian saw her correct small errors after only a few repetitions. Her system realization rose to 1.8%. The first field produced edible greens 10 days before the debt payment deadline. Not enough to solve the debt. Enough to change the manor. Fresh leaves appeared in the kitchen. Radishes followed. The early beans would take longer, but the household stopped cutting bread into thinner slices every morning. The workers received full bowls at midday. Before Adrian allowed a single basket of surplus to be sold, Mara measured out the written shares promised to everyone who had restored the field. Jory checked his family's portion twice, then folded the work agreement and put it carefully inside his coat. Greybank had kept its first labor contract. That mattered, almost as much as the vegetables. Mara stood at the edge of the first harvested row, with dirt on her knees, and stared at a basket of greens as if it contained gold. The system flashed once. Agriculture, SSS. Current realization, 2.6%. First unlock condition completed. Main obstacle, limited cultivated area, and insufficient seed diversity. Next unlock condition. Stabilize food production for the registered household and successfully improve yield across 3 distinct crops. Adrian did not need the panel to understand what had happened. Mara's confidence changed before his eyes. She began planning the next plots aloud instead of asking whether she was allowed to use them. That night, Adrian found half a piece of bread wrapped in cloth behind a loose stone in the pantry wall. He knew immediately whose it was. Mara had eaten full meals for almost 3 weeks. She still hid food. He did not confront her in front of the others. The next morning, he asked her to help count stores. Together, they opened the grain bins, checked the smoked boar meat, reviewed dried beans, onions, oats, saltfish, and the first fresh produce. Mara wrote the numbers in careful block letters. When they finished, Adrian tapped the page. "This is enough for tomorrow." She glanced at him. "I know. And the day after. Probably." Her fingers tightened around the pencil. He did not mention the bread. "Tomorrow there will be food." She looked at the shelves for a long moment. Then she nodded. The hidden piece of bread disappeared from the wall later that day. Adrian never asked whether she ate it or threw it away. Either answer was hers. Greybank had solved hunger for the moment. It had not solved the first payment. Even after selling the old valuables, buying supplies, feeding labor, and repairing the worst leaks, Adrian had managed to seal 60 silver crowns in a box marked for the collector. Fewer than 10 more remained uncommitted. He needed 120 before sunset on the 30th day. Then a rider came from the logging camp north of the valley. 16 workers were sick with fever, infected cuts, and stomach trouble after weeks in wet timber country. The camp manager had already sent for the town physician and been told the visit alone would cost more than he could pay. The rider carried a written list of symptoms because he hoped Greybank still had old household medicines to sell. Leora read the list once, then again, slower. Her violet eyes sharpened in a way Adrian had not seen before. "I think I can help them," she said. Adrian looked at the 30-day debt notice pinned beside the account book. Then he looked at the remaining silver. Greybank had finally learned how to feed itself. Now it needed to learn how to earn. Leora's request for supplies consumed nearly every coin Adrian had not already sealed for the debt collector. She needed a reliable balance, glass vessels, a brazier with controllable heat, clean alcohol, linen, charcoal, several common herbs, 2 less common resins, and enough distilled water to repeat a process if the first attempt failed. Adrian studied the list. "You included enough material for 4 attempts." "Yes." "Are you expecting 3 failures?" "I am allowing for 3 failures." "That is a very expensive difference." Leora folded her arms. "If you want certainty, buy the town physician. If you want me, buy the alcohol." There was no arrogance in the statement. That was what convinced him. She knew she did not have a proven remedy. She also knew exactly what she required to find one. Adrian bought the supplies. Mara watched the silver leave with the expression of a woman observing a roof being dismantled for firewood. Kaya asked whether any of the glass could be used as a weapon if the treatment failed. Leora told her not to touch anything. They converted an old scullery into a temporary laboratory because it had a stone floor, a chimney, and only one wall connected directly to the rest of the house. Adrian considered that last feature a safety advantage. For 2 days, Leora worked through the symptoms sent from the camp. She refused to begin by copying the standard fever tonic from an old estate book. Instead, she separated the problem into pieces. The stomach illness suggested contaminated water or spoiled food. The infected cuts needed cleaning and something to suppress rot. The fever might come from the wounds, the stomach illness, or both. A single strong tonic used on every patient could make the dehydrated men worse. That reasoning matched the system's description of her talent so precisely that Adrian felt a small chill. The first mixture failed because a resin bound too much of the active bitter compound and left a sludge at the bottom of the pot. The second did what Leora wanted chemically and tasted so terrible that even Kaya refused a second drop after volunteering to test a harmless dilution. "It is medicine," Leora said. Kaya stared at her. "It is punishment," Leora added. Leora added honey to the next version. The third experiment caused the household to evacuate. Adrian was in the yard, speaking with Tobin, when a thick stream of blue smoke burst from the scullery chimney. A heartbeat later, Leora stumbled through the door coughing, with her short teal hair standing in 3 directions and both eyebrows stained bright blue. Kaya came out behind her, carrying the brazier at arm's length. Mara opened every nearby window. Adrian waited until Leora stopped coughing. "What happened?" The reaction was unstable. "I can see that." She blinked through watery violet eyes. "But now I know exactly which ratio not to use." Adrian looked past her at the cracked window pane. "That is an expensive way to take notes." Leora wiped blue powder from one eyebrow and examined it on her thumb. "Interesting. It adheres to skin better than I expected. Please stop discovering features." They kept the failed mixture in a sealed ceramic jar. Because Leora insisted the smoke itself might have uses in ventilation testing, Adrian labeled it in the account book as Blue Mistake, 1/2 silver crown. Leora crossed out mistake and wrote experimental byproduct. Adrian crossed that out and wrote expensive blue mistake. By the 4th attempt, she had 3 separate preparations instead of 1 miracle potion. A boiled rehydration drink with salts and mild herbs. a cleaning wash for wounds, a fever preparation adjusted by body size, and whether the patient could keep water down. The system panel changed before they left. Alchemy and Medicine, SSS. Current realization, 1.3%. Main obstacle, insufficient clinical experience. Limited instruments. Next unlock condition. Diagnose and successfully treat a real illness with an original adjusted formulation. The logging camp lay a half-day north, where the valley narrowed into wet pine forest. Adrian went with Leora, because if they were risking the estate's last free money, he wanted to see the patients himself. Kaya accompanied them as protection. Mara remained at Greybank, because spring planting could not pause simply because the household had found a new crisis. The camp smelled of damp bark, smoke, sweat, and sickness. Men lay in 2 bunkhouses built too close to a muddy stream. Wastewater from the cooking area ran downhill, toward the same bank where drinking buckets were filled. Leora noticed the drainage before she examined a single patient. Her expression became offended. She asked the camp manager how long the men had been ill. 4 days. She asked who became sick first. The kitchen crew and the men sleeping in the lower bunkhouse. She asked what they ate. Mostly the same food as everyone else. She asked where the water barrels were cleaned. The manager hesitated. Leora walked to the barrels herself. The inside of one smelled sour. "Stop drawing water from this side of the stream," she said. "Boil every bucket until I say otherwise. Move the waste trench farther downhill, and burn those rags." The manager started to object that he had called for medicine, not camp management. Adrian pointed to the sick men. "You can pay us to be offended later. Move the trench now." The first patients worried Leora. One man had a deep axe cut on his calf, red and swollen around the stitches. Another had severe diarrhea and could barely sit upright. A third showed high fever and confusion. Leora did not give them all the same medicine. She cleaned the wound, reopened one section so trapped fluid could drain, mixed different strengths of the fever preparation, and spent an uncomfortable amount of time asking each patient about urine, thirst, vomiting, and pain. Kaya stood by the door, while Adrian helped carry boiled water. By evening, Leora had stopped talking almost entirely. That worried Adrian more than the fever. She sat beside the most serious patient and counted his breaths, then changed the dilution of his drink because his pulse was too weak for the stronger preparation she had planned. "You are changing it again," Adrian said quietly. "Yes. Because the recipe is not sick, he is." That sentence told Adrian more about her talent than any system panel. The town apothecary arrived the next morning. Master Oswin Pike was a broad, balding man with gray at his temples and the habit of looking at unfamiliar medicine, as if it had personally insulted his profession. The camp manager had sent for him before contacting Greybank. He had come expecting to find desperate lumbermen swallowing roadside herbs mixed by an untrained woman. What he found was Leora Pell. He recognized her immediately. She had once spent 3 months in a charity infirmary where one of his colleagues taught. "You were dismissed for refusing to follow the fever formula," he said. Leora did not deny it. The fever formula included powdered moonroot for every patient. Half of them did not need it. "You were an apprentice." Yes, that did not improve the formula. Adrian stepped between a professional argument and 16 sick men before pride made either side useless. He offered Pike full access to Leora's ingredients, notes, and patients. Pike could inspect the preparations, watch the results, and stop any treatment he believed immediately dangerous. In exchange, he would judge what was actually being done rather than what he remembered about a dismissed apprentice. Pike agreed, because he was cautious, not stupid. He found no forbidden ingredients. He criticized Leora's measuring marks. She criticized the standard apothecary practice of using the same spoon size across shops. They argued over heat control for 20 minutes. Then the man with the infected leg woke with lower fever. By the second day, he could eat. The dehydrated kitchen worker stopped vomiting. 2 mild cases recovered almost entirely after clean water and rest. The worst patient remained dangerous, but his fever came down enough for him to recognize Adrian. Leora stood outside the bunkhouse after midnight, staring at her hands. Adrian brought her bread. She took it without noticing. "He knew my name," she said. "The patient? Yesterday he did not know his own. Tonight he complained that my drink tastes like boiled fence." That sounds promising. A laugh escaped her, but she rubbed one eye with the heel of her hand immediately afterward. Alchemy and Medicine, SSS. Current realization, 3.1%. First unlock condition completed. Main obstacle, limited equipment and narrow patient history. Next unlock condition, produce 3 stable repeatable formulations and document outcomes across multiple patients. Leora could not see the words. She did not need them. For the first time in her life, something she had created had made a person better. Master Pike stayed for another 2 days. By the end, he still disliked Leora's note organization, her habit of adjusting formulations mid-process, and the fact that she referred to one established tonic as ceremonial syrup. He also admitted her wound wash was effective. He offered to buy 6 bottles if she could reproduce the same concentration at Greybank. That became their first professional order. The logging camp manager paid 40 silver crowns for the visit, preparations, and 3 more weeks of medicine. It was less than the town physician had demanded, and enough to matter enormously to Greybank. He also signed an agreement to purchase future wound wash at a fixed rate and promised cut timber at reduced cost when Adrian began serious repairs. 3 days before the payment deadline, Adrian still lacked 17 silver crowns. Master Pike solved that problem without intending to. He purchased the first 6 bottles, 2 jars of salve, and a small batch of Leora's rehydration salts for his shop. He refused to overpay out of sympathy. Adrian respected him for it. The sale brought 11 silver crowns. Mara sold the first surplus greens and radishes in the local village market. Because other fields in the district had been delayed by spring water, her early produce fetched better prices than expected. That brought 4 silver and a heavy bag of copper. The remaining difference came from a place Adrian did not expect. 2 men broke into Greybank's temporary medicine room on the night before he planned to leave for town. They entered through the scullery window. Leora's blue smoke had cracked. Kaya heard the glass shift. She had been sleeping lightly since the boar. By the time the first thief reached the shelf, she was behind him with a length of ashwood in both hands. He surrendered immediately. The second man did not. He came through the window after his partner and pulled a knife when he saw Kaya. Kaya's first movement was fast enough to surprise him. She struck his wrist, forced the blade away from her body, and drove him backward into the wall. Then, she made exactly the kind of mistake Sergeant Bram would later spend weeks removing. She watched the knife too closely. The thief punched with his free hand, broke her balance, and cut the outside of her upper arm when she recovered. The wound was shallow. Kaya became furious. Not wild, worse. She stopped trying to overpower his weapon and kicked the inside of his knee. When he folded, she caught his knife wrist against the window frame and struck his elbow with the ash staff until the blade dropped. One more blow to the ribs, and the struggle. Adrian arrived carrying the wood axe and found Kaya standing over 2 men, blood running down her sleeve, looking personally offended by the concept of knives. The thieves were local drifters. They had heard that Greybank's medicine sold for good money and assumed the recipes must be stored with the bottles. They had no connection to Garrick. That distinction mattered. Adrian refused to make every inconvenience part of one giant conspiracy simply because he had an enemy. The town magistrate paid a small standing reward for delivering wanted thieves. One of the men had 2 previous burglary complaints. The reward was 3 silver crowns. Mara produced the last 2 from a cloth purse. Adrian stared at it. Where did that come from? Eggs. We own 6 chickens. 5. Kaya ate one after the boar. Kaya, whose arm Leora was bandaging, said, "It was injured." Mara's green eyes remained on Adrian. "I have been trading eggs, herb bundles, and 2 baskets of onions. You had 2 silver crowns, and did not tell me? You would have spent them on pillows. Leora nearly dropped the bandage because she started laughing. Adrian wanted to argue. He could not produce a convincing defense. On the 30th day, Adrian rode into town with exactly 120 silver crowns in a locked box strapped beneath the wagon seat. Garrick had chosen to receive the payment at the creditor office in person. He sat with Corvin and two clerks when Adrian entered. The older man was still smiling when Adrian set the box on the table. One clerk counted the coins, then counted them again. The required amount was complete. Garrick's smile did not vanish dramatically. It simply stopped, reaching his eyes. "Where did the money come from?" he asked. Adrian accepted the stamped receipt and tucked it inside his coat. "I have 3 wives, remember?" Corvin's face changed before Garrick's did. Adrian enjoyed that more than he should have. He did not stay to explain. The first payment bought Greybank time, not safety. On the ride home, Adrian committed 12 silver crowns of the next available income to hiring Sergeant Bram Holt. 3 silver and copper and small coin that had never been part of the sealed settlement box became Bram's advance, with the remaining 9 due from the next medicine order. Bram was 58, thick through the chest, gray-bearded, and walked with a slight stiffness in his left knee. He had served 24 years in the Royal Infantry, 7 as a sergeant, and retired after deciding that officers were becoming younger faster than he was becoming patient. Adrian wanted him to train Kaya, 5 willing villagers, and Adrian himself. Bram looked at Adrian's narrow shoulders, Kaya's scarred hands, and the rusted weapons Greybank had gathered. "How long do you want me?" 3 months to start. Bram looked at Kaya again. 3 months will teach her how much she does not know. Kaya met his eyes. "That is already more than I knew last month." Bram grunted. "Good answer." Adrian paid the first week in advance. Greybank had learned to feed itself. It had learned to make money. Now, under the supervision of a retired sergeant who insulted everyone's feet before breakfast, it began learning how not to lose either. Sergeant Bram Holt began training by taking away everything Kaya enjoyed. He took away speed first. For the entire first week, he made her move slowly through 6 basic positions until her legs shook. When she tried to accelerate, he struck the side of her boot with a cane. Kaya was ordered to practice cuts with a wooden sword so light she could not rely on force to hide bad alignment. Bram made her stop at exact points, hold the blade, breathe, reset, and begin again. Kaya wanted new techniques. Bram gave her the same step, the same guard, the same simple thrust, and the same recovery for hours. She hated him by the 4th morning. Bram seemed pleased. "Good," he told Adrian. "Students who like training usually have not trained enough." "I can hear you." "Then your ears work. We can save time testing those." The system rewarded none of the effort with sudden strength. Kaya's realization moved slowly from 2% to 3%, then a little beyond. Her muscles remained human. Her lungs burned during hill runs. The old sergeant could still touch her shoulder with a practice blade whenever she overcommitted, but Adrian watched something unusual happen beneath the ordinary work. Kaya understood correction almost immediately. If Bram changed the angle of her rear foot once, she remembered it. If he'd demonstrated how to shift weight without lifting the heel, she copied him within minutes. If he caught her reaching during a parry, the same mistake almost never appeared twice. Her body could not keep pace with her mind, but her mind collected movement like a dry field collecting rain. 2 weeks into training, Bram demonstrated a descending cut and grimaced when he recovered. Kaya lowered her practice sword. "Your left knee turns inward." Bram stared at her. "My knee is older than you. It knows where to turn. It hurts because your hip stops early. My hip also knows its profession." She walked over and, without ceremony, adjusted the angle of his rear foot by half a handspan. Bram muttered something uncomplimentary about young people. Then he repeated the movement. His expression changed. Adrian was leaning against the fence with a spear across his shoulders. "You told us yesterday that people who stand like that are idiots." Bram immediately recovered his dignity. "Young idiots. Old soldiers have earned exceptions." Kaya looked at Adrian. "Adrian, looked at Kaya. Neither was brave enough to laugh until Bram turned away. Adrian trained too, and his progress provided balance to Kaya's alarming development. She learned a new thrust in 10 minutes. He spent 2 days remembering not to lift his elbow. She corrected her footwork after one stumble. He fell into the mud hard enough that Leora asked whether concussions could improve coordination. Bram did not allow excuses based on noble status. You want to command people in a fight? Then learn enough not to order them into stupid places. That lesson suited Adrian. He did not need to defeat Kaya. He needed to understand distance, formations, simple weapons, and what frightened inexperienced fighters into mistakes. The estate grew around the training yard. Mara completed the system's next condition by stabilizing 3 crops across different soils. Her early greens fed the village. Beans improved a tired strip while providing food. Barley on the restored field produced a stronger stand than neighboring plots, despite the poor start. Agriculture realization rose above 5%. The practical results mattered more than the number. She began testing compost mixtures instead of simply spreading whatever manure was available. She rotated sections deliberately. She had Jory rebuild part of the north retaining bank before planting there, preventing another season of erosion. She convinced Adrian to buy seed from 3 different sources, so one bad batch could not ruin the year. She also became increasingly possessive of the east field. Not selfish, protective. When Adrian suggested using one corner for temporary lumber storage, Mara stared at him until he moved the lumber elsewhere. Leora earned a room of her own for the laboratory after one of her heated mixtures made Nell ban her from the kitchen permanently. Master Pike began carrying 3 Greybank preparations in town. Leora standardized her wound wash, fever reducer, and rehydration salts enough that Pike could sell them without standing beside every customer to explain which bottle might explode. None of them exploded. Adrian considered that a meaningful improvement. The logging camp ordered regularly. 2 nearby villages began buying the wound wash. A midwife purchased salve in small jars. Leora kept careful patient notes after Pike told her that brilliance recorded badly was only a future argument. The first dependable repeat orders also closed an older obligation. Adrian used the first portion of that profit to pay Tobin and Nell the full 6 weeks of wages the estate had owed them before his arrival. Tobin counted the coins once, stopped, and then counted them again more slowly. He did not thank Adrian extravagantly. The old steward simply returned the next morning with the estate keys on his belt instead of in the drawer, where he had begun keeping them. Greybank's first repaired roof section appeared in the 2nd month. Then, a real front door. Then, window glass. Every time Adrian looked at the improving manor, he imagined a proper office, a comfortable chair, perhaps a bottle of wine that did not taste like vinegar. Every time he opened the account book, something else needed money first. One evening, Kaya came to dinner with both palms rubbed raw from drills. Leora caught her wrist before she reached the bread, cleaned the skin while complaining that trained fighters were apparently incapable of noticing blood, and wrapped both hands. Mara pushed the larger stew bowl toward Kaya without comment because she had spent the most energy that day. Kaya looked at the portion, then at Mara. Mara only said, "Eat it," before Adrian decides it belongs in the debt reserve. Adrian objected that he had never repossessed anyone's dinner. Nobody at the table appeared convinced. The mill wheel had to be repaired. The west field needed seed. Leora needed better tubing. Bram insisted the guards needed boots. Mara insisted the mule needed feed. Turnip, who had contributed nothing to the strategic planning of Greybank, consumed his share with quiet confidence. By the 3rd month, the estate had reached the point where strangers noticed it. That created a new kind of problem. A group of local bandits had spent years collecting what they called road protection from isolated farms and weak villages. Under the old Greybank management, there had been little worth stealing and even less traffic. Now, medicine carts crossed the stone bridge twice a week. Produce moved toward town. Timber came back from the logging camp. Travelers had begun using the road because Greybank's villagers repaired the worst ruts near the bridge. 3 men arrived one afternoon and asked for Adrian. Their leader introduced himself as Hob Rain and explained with practiced politeness that his employer offered security services. The fee would be 1/10 of all goods crossing the bridge under Greybank's protection. Adrian asked what threats the service protected against. Hob smiled. The roads can be dangerous. Yes, I noticed you on one. Kaya, standing behind Adrian, shifted her weight slightly. Hob noticed her and revised whatever insult he had been preparing. Adrian refused the fee. Hob left without violence. Bram watched the 3 riders disappear and spat into the dust. They will test us. Good, Adrian said. Bram looked at him. That is not the usual answer. If they were confident, they would have demanded payment instead of offering a service. I would rather learn how they fight before someone more expensive tries. Adrian stopped the next medicine shipment for 3 days. He used the delay to prepare the route. The road north crossed an old wooden bridge over a drainage cut before joining the wider town road. Spring rain had softened the ground on the western approach. Mara showed him exactly where wagon wheels sank deepest and which verge remained firm because of gravel beneath the grass. Adrian shifted the shipment to a narrower cart. He placed 2 ordinary crates in the visible rear section and hid the higher value medicine in a false compartment beneath sacks of turnips. Leora objected to her medicine traveling under turnips. Adrian told her theft prevention was not required to respect professional dignity. Bram chose 4 trained villagers to accompany them. Kaya rode on the cart. Adrian drove. The bandits attacked exactly where Bram predicted, but not exactly as Adrian expected. There were 11 of them, not 6. That mattered immediately. 2 riders blocked the road ahead. 4 emerged behind from the trees. The rest moved along the west side, where they expected the wagon to turn off the road and become trapped in soft ground. Hob was not present. His deputy, a thick-armed man named Dane Crow, led the group with a short sword and leather armor reinforced by metal plates. Crow called for them to surrender the wagon. Adrian stopped the mule. Turnip looked grateful. "One chance," Crow shouted. Adrian lifted one hand. The 4 villagers with him moved behind the cart instead of away from it. Bram had drilled that response until they could do it frightened. Crow frowned. Kaya stepped down with her sword. It was not a good sword. Adrian still could not afford one. It was a straight militia blade, sharpened properly by Bram, and balanced well enough not to sabotage training. The first 2 bandits came at her together. The fight showed exactly how far she had come. Kaya did not swing hard. She moved 1 step offline, parried the first man's cut without meeting force directly, and struck the side of his knee with the flat. When he stumbled, she used him to block the second attacker and drove the guard of her sword into his mouth. Both men went down quickly. A month earlier, she would have chased the advantage. Now she returned to position. Bram, hidden with 3 additional men behind the stone wall farther up the road, smiled for perhaps half a second. Then, Crow entered the fight with the ugly efficiency of experience. He kept his short sword close, crowded Kaya's longer weapon, and hit her with his shoulder when she tried to create distance. The impact drove her into the cartwheel. Kaya recovered fast enough to block the next cut, but Crow kicked her shin and forced her backward again. The system had given her no immunity to pain. Crow laughed. "Strong farm girl, that all?" Kaya answered by changing the problem. She stopped trying to keep him at sword range. When he rushed again, she stepped inside with him, jammed his sword arm against her shoulder, and used the hip turn Bram had made her practice until she hated it. Crow lost his balance. She did not throw him cleanly, but she displaced him enough that his boot landed in the wheel rut beside the road. Wet clay shifted. His knee bent sideways. Kaya struck his wrist once. The short sword fell. She could have cut his throat. Instead, she kicked the weapon away and drove him face first into the side of the cart. 2 more bandits charged her while she was engaged. That was when Adrian's preparation mattered. He snapped the reins loose from Turnip, jumped from the driver's bench, and shoved the cart brake pin free. The cart rolled backward down the slight slope. The attackers behind had expected a stationary obstacle. They scattered as the loaded wagon moved toward them. Bram's hidden group rose behind the stone wall. and threw 3 weighted ropes across the narrow road. One bandit went down hard. Another horse shied sideways. The western group tried to circle through the verge. Their boots sank past the ankle in the rain-softened ground Mara had marked. Adrian's villagers stayed on the gravel strip. The battle lasted less than 5 minutes after that. The bandits were dangerous, while they believed Greybank's people would break. Once their ambush lost shape, they became individuals trapped in bad ground against opponents who had rehearsed where to stand. Kaya took a hard strike to the ribs and another along her shoulder. She beat weaker men quickly, but Crow rose again and forced her into a second exchange that was much closer than Adrian liked. This time, she did not rush. She watched his feet, not his sword. Crow favored the injured leg without realizing it. His weight shifted early before every forward cut. Kaya waited until the 3rd repetition, parried short, and hit his forearm with both hands on the hilt. The sword dropped again. Her next blow stopped a finger from his throat. Crow froze. "Done," she said. He believed her. 3 bandits escaped into the trees. The rest surrendered or lay groaning beside the road. Greybank suffered bruises, one broken finger, Kaya's battered ribs, and a cut on Adrian's cheek from a thrown stone he had not seen coming. The medicine shipment survived. So did the turnips. Leora later declared the turnips the least medically valuable cargo, and therefore the most predictable survivors. That evening, after Leora had wrapped Kaya's ribs, the system finally gave Adrian the martial payoff it had withheld through weeks of training. Martial Arts, SSS, Current Realization, 5.2%. First unlock condition completed. Main obstacle: limited endurance against trained opponents, and insufficient experience protecting others while under pressure. Next unlock condition: defeat a professionally trained opponent while maintaining responsibility for another objective. Kaya could not see the panel, but she did not need it to know something had changed. She had entered the fight, trying to prove she was strong. She had ended it by holding position, trusting the plan, and refusing an unnecessary kill. The road fight changed Greybank more than the money from the shipment. Stories traveled ahead of facts. Within a week, the village heard that Kaya had defeated 20 men by herself. Bram corrected the number down to 11, and added that 9 other defenders had been present. The story became 30 men by the following market day. Kaya hated the exaggeration. Adrian did not. Fear is cheaper than guards. It is inaccurate. So are most useful rumors. Hob Rain disappeared before the magistrate could question him. One captured bandit claimed Hob crossed the district line the same night Dane Crow failed to return. Without the threat behind their protection fees, the local gang fragmented into fugitives and petty thieves, instead of remaining a separate enemy. Greybank still had to solve. Families that had left Greybank during the worst year began asking whether empty cottages could be reclaimed. 2 young men requested guard training. A blacksmith from a nearby hamlet offered to repair farm tools in exchange for a permanent stall near the bridge once traffic improved. The mill wheel turned for the first time in years after timber from the logging camp arrived at reduced cost. Mara stood beside the mill race, listening to the repaired mechanism, and immediately began talking about flour storage, milling schedules, and grain loss percentages. Adrian heard the sound differently. A working mill meant a service people paid for. Greybank was no longer merely surviving. Lord Garrick learned the same thing. Until then, his agents had explained Adrian's progress as temporary luck. A good patch of spring vegetables, a failed apprentice stumbling into one useful medicine, a gang of local criminals making a foolish attack. Then Garrick received 3 reports in the same week. Greybank's mill was operating. Master Pike was selling Leora Pell's medicines in town. Farmers were asking Mara Thorne for planting advice. And the white-haired caravan girl his branch had placed on Adrian's candidate list had become the visible center of an estate guard. Garrick stopped waiting for the debt to kill Greybank by itself. Town merchants who depended on Vale family warehouses received polite visits. A grain buyer suddenly offered Mara half the previous week's rate. The hardware merchant claimed his next shipment of iron tools had already been promised elsewhere. A cartwright refused Greybank credit after years of extending it to every minor landholder in the district. Master Pike was told that carrying Greybank medicine might affect his access to one of the city's larger wholesalers. Pike's response involved language Leora repeated at dinner, until Nell told her not to use it near the kitchen. The pressure worked anyway. By the start of the 4th month, Greybank had goods to sell and fewer doors willing to open. Adrian read the latest merchant refusals at the repaired dining table, while rain tapped against windows that no longer leaked. Leora suggested making their own doors. Kaya said the new front door was strong enough to discourage most merchants, if used correctly. Mara asked what percentage of their sales actually required the city. Adrian looked up. That was the better question. The answer, after an evening of accounts, was less than half. They had spent months trying to become acceptable to town merchants who could be pressured by Garrick. So, Adrian decided to stop asking them for permission. Greybank owned a stone bridge, a working mill, open ground beside the road, food, medicine, and enough trained guards to make travelers feel safer than they did on most country routes. Independent caravan companies passed 30 miles south because there was nowhere reliable to stop in the Vale district. Adrian put his finger on the map. Then we build somewhere worth stopping. Building somewhere worth stopping required money, which meant Adrian's plan began in the traditional Greybank manner. The old carriage shed became a covered trading hall after Kaya and 3 guards removed the rotten doors. Timber from the logging camp repaired the roof. Stone taken from a collapsed garden wall formed 6 permanent stall bases beside the bridge. The mill yard was leveled for wagon parking. Mara marked a clean water point upstream and threatened anyone who washed animals there with a fine large enough to make Adrian proud. Nell organized meals for travelers. Tobin managed bridge records. Adrian wrote to 4 independent caravan masters with the same proposal. Good produce, reliable milling, verified medicine, safe overnight ground, a low bridge fee, no obligation to use Vale family warehouses in town. 2 never answered. 1 refused. The 4th arrived to investigate. Her name was Celine Ward, a short caravan master with weathered brown skin, 3 gold rings in 1 ear, and the practical suspicion of someone who had been robbed by men with excellent manners. She inspected the bridge stones, the guard posts, the mill, the well, Leora's storage room, and Mara's produce before discussing price. Celine instead asked how much he wanted for exclusive access. He refused. That surprised her. You could charge me more for keeping competitors out for 1 season. Then you decide Greybank cannot live without you. I prefer 4 caravans paying modest fees to 1 caravan deciding whether we eat. Celine smiled for the first time. You really are related to the Vales. That sounded insulting. It was meant as a medical observation. She agreed to stop on her next westbound run. The first Greybank market day happened in early summer. Adrian expected perhaps 50 outsiders. More than 200 came. Some arrived because they had heard about the medicines. Some wanted grain, seed, or vegetables. Others came because a functioning market outside town control was new enough to be entertainment. Independent peddlers rented the stone stalls. A blacksmith set up under an awning. 2 cloth sellers came with Celine's caravan. Villagers from 3 nearby settlements brought eggs, cheese, baskets, smoked fish, and tools for repair. The transformation struck Adrian hardest from the manor steps. 4 months earlier, the same yard had held a broken wagon and wet firewood. Now children ran between stalls. Millstones turned. Horses drank at the lower trough. Kaya's guards directed carts around the narrow entrance with reasonable competence. Leora had placed a handwritten sign over her stall that read, "Medicine, not miracles, ask before drinking." Adrian asked why the warning was necessary. Because 1 man tried to drink the wound wash. Did you stop him? Eventually. Why eventually? I wanted to know why. He made her add, "Do not drink wound wash." Mara's stall drew farmers first. She had no talent for sales speeches and no interest in learning. She placed samples of Greybank barley beside ordinary local grain, weighed equal measures, and let the difference show. Her kernels were more consistent. The early bean crop had suffered less rot during the wet spring. Her radishes, grown from the best of 3 purchased seedlots, after she adjusted planting depth and spacing, split less often in the district's heavy soil. She was already saving promising plants for future seed, but she had not pretended one spring was enough to breed a new variety. When farmers asked whether she used a secret treatment, Mara explained drainage, seed selection, spacing, and storage. Most looked disappointed that the answer involved work. A few listened carefully. One older farmer recognized her from years before, when she had worked on his brother's land for meals. "Mara Thorne?" She nodded. He looked at the grain, then at Adrian, then back at her. "You grew this?" "Yes." "On Greybank soil?" "Some of it." He picked up a handful and rubbed the kernels between his fingers. "My brother said you were too slow." Mara's face did not change. "Your brother planted oats in standing water." Adrian had to move away before his expression affected negotiations. Master Pike attended in person and stood beside Leora's stall, long enough to make his professional endorsement obvious. He did not praise her extravagantly. He told buyers which preparations he had tested, what they were useful for, and what they were not. That credibility sold more medicine than a dozen claims of genius. Leora spent half the morning explaining a new burn salve, and the other half arguing with Pike about whether her labels were readable. Kaya had the least visible job and the most visible presence. Her ash-white hair and red eyes were already associated with the road ambush story. She wore a plain dark training coat over light armor, and carried the first good sword Adrian had managed to buy her, a narrow steel blade from a retired officer who needed money more than memories. Farmer bandits avoided Greybank that day. So did most drunks. Kaya did have to settle one argument over a chicken. A farmer claimed the bird had been stolen. A cook claimed he had purchased it honestly. Kaya inspected the chicken, the basket, the tie cord, the tracks in the mud, and both men with the concentration of someone reconstructing an assassination. She determined the chicken had escaped on its own and stolen grain from the cook's stall before being captured. Adrian heard the ruling from across the yard. "What did she do with the chicken?" he asked Bram. "Placed it under temporary guard until ownership was proven." Of course she did. The market's best comedy arrived wearing expensive boots. Corvin Vale rode in shortly before noon with 2 servants, and the expression of a man expecting to witness the final convulsions of a bankrupt cousin. Instead, he found a line of wagons waiting to cross the bridge. Adrian greeted him politely enough to be irritating. Corvin wandered through the stalls looking for flaws. He tried the fresh bread sold beside the mill and declared it excellent before learning the flour came from Mara's grain. His face tightened. Leora immediately offered him a small cup of herbal cordial. Corvin hesitated. Kaya, standing nearby, asked in complete seriousness, "Is that the one that numbs the tongue?" Corvin put the cup down. Leora looked offended. "That happened once. Twice," Adrian said. "The second time was a different mechanism." Corvin left without buying anything else. By sunset, the market had generated stall fees, bridge fees, milling fees, produce sales, medicine sales, and 3 new supply agreements. After seller shares, food, extra guards, and immediate operating costs, 31 silver crowns went into Greybank's protected debt reserve. The larger value was future work. The 3 supply agreements were worth as much as 138 crowns over the next 6 weeks, if Greybank actually delivered. It also attracted a royal agricultural inspector. Elian Rusk was traveling east on routine service and stopped because he saw grain samples displayed beside the road. He was not grand. He wore a brown coat with a crown badge at the collar, carried his own notebooks, and had the permanent squint of a man who spent more time staring at leaves than at people. He questioned Mara for almost an hour. At first, Adrian worried the inspection might create trouble. Then he realized Rusk was genuinely interested in the barley's uniformity and the lack of gray speckling on several leaf samples. A crop sickness had appeared in western districts that spring. Farmers called it gray blight because infected plants developed ashen streaks before the heads weakened. It had not reached Greybank in force, but Rusk had brought affected samples in sealed paper. Mara studied them without touching it first. She asked about rainfall, seed source, field rotation, and whether sick plots shared drainage. Rusk's questions became more precise in response. He purchased several Graybank grain samples and seed bundles for comparison. Adrian filed the conversation under useful government curiosity and returned to counting market receipts. The Gray Blight did not dominate their lives. They still had a debt to pay. By midsummer, Graybank changed almost weekly. One new family moved into an empty cottage and repaired its roof. Then another. The blacksmith who had attended the first market established a permanent forge near the mill. A cooper rented storage space. Celine Ward began scheduling Graybank as a regular stop for 2 caravan routes. Mara expanded cultivation into the north slope after the retaining bank repair held through heavy rain. She organized harvest groups with written shares, reducing arguments before they began. She began saving seeds separately, according to performance and field origin. By midsummer, 52 acres were producing directly for Graybank, and another 34 were being worked by returning families under written share agreements. Graybank did not own every basket those fields produced. Worker shares, seed reserves, animal feed, and household stores came out before Adrian counted anything as saleable profit. Medicine remained the highest margin business. In a strong month, Leora's 3 standardized product lines could leave 35 to 45 silver crowns after herbs, alcohol, glass, transport, and Pike's retail share. The mill, market, produce, and road fees added smaller but steadier amounts. Leora moved from temporary work tables into a real laboratory built from the old washhouse. She installed shelves, a proper furnace hood, glass racks, and a locked cabinet. She also produced 3 small accidental fires in 6 weeks. The third fire convinced Adrian to build a stone basin outside the door and keep sand buckets beside it. Leora called the measure excessive. Kaya agreed with Adrian. That ended the discussion. Bram trained 12 estate guards by then, though only 4 were good enough to trust alone. His original 3-month contract expired at the start of summer. Adrian paid the balance on time and offered a permanent monthly contract as Graybank's training master. Bram accepted after negotiating 2 conditions: authority to remove idiots from guard duty and the right to call Adrian an idiot during training if necessary. Adrian objected to the second clause until the notary informed him that it was not actually written down. Kaya had passed 8% realization. She could now handle weak, untrained attackers almost casually, but Bram still beat her in structured sparring whenever he could force her into unfamiliar timing. Adrian improved more modestly. He could use a spear without endangering himself, hold a guard line, and move under pressure. Bram's greatest compliment came after Adrian survived 30 seconds against Kaya in a drill. "You did not embarrass your ancestors." Adrian considered having the words engraved somewhere. With growth came pressure. Derek's people could no longer stop Graybank by persuading town merchants not to buy. The first warehouse fire happened on a windless night. A guard smelled lamp oil near the north store and found burning cloth shoved beneath the outer boards. Because the roof had been repaired and Mara had insisted dry straw be stored in a separate shed, the flames were contained before they spread. One wall blackened. 2 crates of empty jars shattered during the response. No person was hurt. Adrian stood in the yard at midnight holding the oil-soaked rag. This was not a careless traveler. Someone had climbed the fence, avoided the gate, and chosen the store holding Leora's packed medicine bottles. Kaya wanted to increase patrols immediately. Bram agreed. Mara wanted all dry storage divided, so one fire could not take the entire season's value. Leora wanted to know whether the oil could be traced by smell. Adrian wanted evidence. They found footprints, a cut section of rear fence, and nothing that connected directly to Garrick. So Adrian did not accuse him publicly. He changed procedures instead. The household divided inventories. Important contracts moved from the manor office into a stone lockbox, hidden beneath the mill records. Cash no longer remained in one place overnight. Fire barrels stood at each major building. Mara widened the clean strips around grain stacks. The sabotage failed to destroy goods, but it taught them how someone would try. The next attack came through law. Garrick's attorneys revived an old boundary dispute involving the stone bridge. The order was delivered by Verden Fane, Garrick's estate factor, a careful middle-aged man Adrian had already seen at the first payment office and at 2 creditor meetings. The river marked the edge between 2 ancestral holdings. A clause from 40 years earlier gave one creditor branch partial maintenance authority during unresolved debt proceedings. Acting as recovery administrator for that branch, Garrick used the clause to suspend Graybank's commercial toll collection and claimed that all heavy traffic required joint approval. In practice, he had closed Adrian's most convenient route. The timing was excellent. Graybank had buyers, it had goods, it had caravans scheduled, and now its profitable bridge sat behind a legal argument that could take months to settle. Adrian spent 2 days with Tobin, old maps, maintenance receipts, and enough bad handwriting to make Leora's notes look elegant. He found no easy loophole. If he used the bridge commercially in defiance of the order, Garrick could seek penalties large enough to damage the final debt payment. Kaya suggested crossing anyway. Mara suggested a shallow ford 2 miles upstream, then rejected her own idea because heavy carts would destroy the bank and lose wheels after summer storms. Celine Ward mentioned an old river road on the eastern side. The road was longer, rougher, and partly overgrown. It also belonged entirely to Graybank until it joined Crown land beyond the Vale boundary. Adrian walked it the next day with Mara and Kaya. The route followed higher ground through willow scrub, narrowed between a wooded slope and the river, then opened near an old quarry track. Mara pointed out 2 sections where drainage could be repaired quickly. Kaya pointed out 3 places ideal for ambush. Adrian looked at both women. I appreciate how differently you see the same road. It needs culverts, Mara said. It needs watchposts, Kaya said. Excellent. It needs to become cheaper than losing the bridge. They began clearing it. At the same time, Garrick made a second calculation. If Graybank could not be starved through trade, perhaps the family making it successful could be separated. Offers went out quietly. 1 to Mara, 1 to Leora, 1 to Kaya. All 3 were better on paper than anything Adrian had been able to give them when they arrived. Mara received her offer while buying iron fittings for a new grain dryer. The man who approached her represented a large estate south of the district. He was polite. He did not insult Graybank or Adrian. That made the proposal more serious. The estate offered Mara a proper house, a salary several times greater than any personal allowance she took from Graybank, 6 permanent field crews, and authority over hundreds of acres of rich valley land. There was one limitation. The land would never be hers. She would manage it at the pleasure of its owner. Mara asked whether she could choose seed suppliers. The agent said major purchases required approval. She asked whether she could change crop rotation. He said the estate had traditional schedules. She asked who decided which fields were planted first. He told her the master would naturally retain final authority. Mara thanked him and returned to comparing iron fittings. The agent increased the salary. She refused again. When Adrian later asked why, Mara did not mention loyalty or marriage. She was sorting seed packets at the Eastfield table. They offered me more land, she said. They did not offer me my land. Her hand rested on the worn table as if the wood itself settled the matter. Leora's offer came from the City Alchemical Guild. It was even more tempting. A licensed laboratory, better glassware, access to imported ingredients, wealthy clients, a formal title. Leora listened until the guild representative explained that formulas developed under guild employment became guild property. She asked whether that included improvements to her existing wound wash. Yes. Patient-specific variations? Yes. New formulations based on her own prior notes? Yes, if produced with guild equipment. Leora leaned back in her chair. So you want to buy my future in exchange for shelves? The representative objected to the phrasing. Leora agreed that the shelves were probably very good. Then she declined. She returned to Graybank annoyed rather than flattered, and spent dinner describing the guild's instrument room in painful detail. Adrian eventually asked whether she regretted refusing. Of course I regret refusing. Did you hear what kind of condenser they have? Then why refuse? She stared at him as if the answer were obvious. because I want the condenser, not the owner. Kaya's offer arrived last. A captain employed by Garrick's allies met her after training and offered a place in a noble house guard. The pay was good. The equipment was excellent. The house maintained a real training hall and employed 2 veteran instructors. Kaya asked one question. If I decide to leave, how much notice do I give? The captain explained that guards accepted long service contracts, 5 years. And if I leave before that? The captain began explaining repayment, breach penalties, and restrictions on employment with rival houses. Kaya stopped him. No. He tried again. She did not. When she told Adrian, he felt satisfaction first, then discomfort. All 3 women had rejected offers that looked richer than Greybank, because those offers limited the freedom they had begun building here. Adrian had promised freedom. So far, most of it existed only in his words. The debt contracts still made him sole legal owner of Greybank. The marriage registrations gave him broad household authority under local law. If he died, their positions became uncertain. If he became a worse man tomorrow, the law would still give him more power than any of them. He disliked relying on his own good intentions as a permanent institution. 2 days later, he summoned a licensed notary from a crown town outside Garrick's influence. The documents took a week. They were expensive. Mara objected to the fee before she knew what they contained. Adrian signed anyway. The first agreement gave Mara a defined share of Greybank's agricultural income, legal authority over crop planning and farm labor within agreed budgets, and ownership of any seed lines she personally developed. The second gave Leora sole ownership of her formulas, a share of laboratory profits, and independent control of her workshop, so long as she complied with estate fire rules. Leora tried to negotiate the fire rules. Adrian refused. The third appointed Kaya captain of Greybank's household guard, with authority over training, patrols, and immediate security decisions. All 3 documents granted personal property rights and a share of accumulated profits. The notary had been careful about one boundary. None of the agreements transferred mortgaged land, bridge title, or any asset pledged directly to the 3 creditor branches. They transferred income rights, intellectual property, management authority, and personal property, so the existing security on Greybank remained legally untouched. A 4th clause applied to each wife. After the final debt was paid, any of them could dissolve the marriage without losing earned property or their agreed share of profits already accumulated. Kaya read every line twice. Mara read the agricultural schedules before she read the marriage clause. Leora stopped at the laboratory liability section. Hypothetically, she said, if a wall were damaged during a controlled experiment, is that a personal expense or a workshop expense? Adrian raised his eyes slowly. Why are you asking? Hypothetically. Kaya was already standing. I will inspect the laboratory. Leora caught her sleeve. There is nothing to inspect yet. The word yet did not improve Adrian's mood. The documents changed something in the house that no system panel measured. Mara began calling Greybank's fields ours when speaking to workers, then occasionally mine when arguing over the East plot. Leora ordered a maker's stamp with her own name for medicine seals. Kaya reorganized patrol schedules without waiting for Adrian's approval, and then informed him afterward, exactly as the document allowed. Adrian discovered that sharing authority created more arguments and fewer mistakes. He considered that profitable. After ordinary wages, ingredients, seed purchases, repairs, and worker shares had been paid, the ring-fenced debt reserve stood at 703 silver crowns. 1,480 remained due after the first installment, so the family still needed 777 more before the deadline. The number was frightening. It was also no longer absurd. The old river road became usable by late summer. Mara's crews repaired drainage on the 2 wet sections. Workers filled ruts with broken stone from the quarry track. Kaya established simple watch shelters at 2 bends. Adrian negotiated temporary passage rights where the road touched crown land and paid the fee in advance. So, Garrick could not challenge it. Leora's workshop had also stopped depending on her hands for every simple task. 2 village assistants washed glass prepared standard salts, labeled sealed batches, and recorded weights under her supervision, leaving Leora to handle diagnosis, unstable compounds, and formulation changes. Pike and 2 distant shops now ordered repeat batches instead of individual bottles. The first large shipment scheduled for the route carried Graybank medicines, milled flour, preserved vegetables, seed, and 3 crates of higher value salves ordered by distant merchants. It also carried most of the cash Graybank expected to earn before the final autumn harvest. Everyone understood the risk. Garrick understood it too. Adrian learned of the attack only when it began. The caravan had 6 wagons. Salim Ward's drivers, 8 Graybank guards, Kaya, Bram, Adrian, and Leora, because several buyers had requested medical consultation at the destination. Mara remained at Graybank to supervise harvest preparation. The road narrowed between the river and a wooded slope, 3 miles from the estate. Kaya had identified it weeks earlier as an ambush point, so Adrian had prepared for one. He expected bandits to block the front and attack from the trees. The mercenaries did more. A felled pine crashed onto the road behind the 3rd wagon, splitting the caravan in half. Crossbow bolts came from the slope at the same moment. One struck a wagon board. Another hit a guard in the thigh. Kaya shouted for shields before Adrian could. The first 3 wagons pushed forward toward the planned rally bend. The rear 3 could not move past the tree. Then armed men rose from reeds along the riverside. They wore no house colors. They did wear matching boots and moved in pairs. Professionals. Adrian understood Garrick's escalation immediately. Local bandits had failed. These men had been paid to do a job. Their objective became clear when 2 attackers ignored the drivers and threw oil flasks toward the medicine wagon. The oil made the purpose obvious. They had come to destroy the cargo. When one crossbowman shifted his aim toward Adrian, the officer below barked, "Veil alive. Goods burn." The order explained the discipline of the attack, though not its safety. Bolts, oil, panicked horses, and armed men could kill someone by accident. Garrick was already willing to gamble more heavily than the lawyer Adrian had met in spring. "Protect the cargo," Adrian shouted. "Do not chase." That order mattered, because Kaya's first instinct was to climb the slope toward the crossbows. She stopped herself. A month earlier, she might not have. Leora dragged the wounded guard behind a wheel, cut the bolt shaft, and immediately told him not to pull it through. Then she opened one of the leather cases she had insisted on packing beside the driver's bench. The attackers reached the rear wagons. Adrian took position in the gap between 2 carts with 3 guards and a spear. Bram covered the opposite side. A mercenary rushed Adrian with a short axe. Months of training did not make the exchange elegant. Adrian used reach. He kept the spear point between them, forced the man to turn around the wheel, and thrust toward the thigh, instead of trying for a dramatic kill. The attacker knocked the shaft aside, and came close enough that Adrian smelled leather oil. Adrian stepped back exactly as Bram had drilled, and used the wagon corner to deny the axe a full swing. His second thrust entered the man's upper arm. The mercenary fell away. Adrian's hands shook afterward. He kept the spear up anyway. Kaya met the enemy officer near the blocked tree. He was lean, dark-haired, and carried a saber with a basket guard. He watched her defeat one of his men in 2 exchanges, and immediately stopped underestimating her. That made him far more dangerous than Dane Crow. He did not try to beat her in a clean duel. He used the ambush around him. He kept the felled pine between Kaya and the rear wagon, forced her to choose between pursuing him and protecting the cargo, and called 2 men forward whenever she moved too far from the wheel line. Kaya was faster than he was. That did not solve the problem. Each time she pressed him back, a mercenary reached for an oil flask or a wounded guard. Each time she turned to protect someone, the officer cut at her from the side. Bram intercepted one flanker, took a cut across his sleeve, and shouted, "Your job is the wagons, not his pride." She stopped trying to finish the officer quickly, and anchored herself where the narrow gravel strip let her cover both the medicine wagon and the gap beside the tree. That choice kept the cargo intact, long enough for Adrian's preparation to enter the fight. Leora pulled a sealed ceramic pot from beneath the medicine bench. It bore 3 warning labels. The blue mistake had changed over the summer. Leora had studied the failed volatile fever mixture because its irritating smoke dispersed quickly outdoors and left no lasting poison at low concentration. She replaced the unstable component, reduced the heat required, and created small ceramic charges that produced a dense blue cloud when broken over a hot ember mixture. Greybank's guards had wet cloths tied around their necks because Leora had insisted on it before departure. She cracked the first charge against the road. Blue smoke rolled between the rear wagons. The effect was immediate. Eyes watered. Men coughed. The attackers lost sight of one another, and more importantly, lost the paired movement their officer had been using to pressure the wagons. Adrian pulled his cloth over his nose. Your expensive blue mistake is useful. Leora was kneeling over the wounded guard. It is still an expensive mistake. Now it has a budget category. Kaya knew exactly where the wagon wheels, ditch edge, and broken pine lay, because she had walked the route before the shipment. The officer did not. When the smoke separated him from his supporting men, he tried to move around the tree toward open ground where he could rebuild the formation. Kaya refused to follow. She gave him the road and kept the cargo. Irritated, he came back toward the only clear lane between the pine trunk and the rear wheel. That was the space she had chosen to defend. His saber had reach. Kaya let him spend it against the narrow lane. She parried short, moved half a step, and forced his boots closer to the splintered pine each time he attacked. On the third exchange, his heel struck the trunk. His stance widened to recover. Kaya stepped inside, hit his sword forearm with the guard of her blade, and drove her shoulder into his chest. He went over the broken edge of the tree. Before he could rise, Kaya's sword point was beneath his jaw. He looked through the blue smoke, at men who could no longer see their formation, at Bram's defenders still holding the wagons, and at Celine's front group, returning around the bend because the crossbow fire had weakened. He surrendered. The mercenary force withdrew or gave up soon afterward. 3 Greybank people were seriously wounded. None died. 2 wagons were damaged. 1 crate of medicine burned before the fire was smothered. The captured officer carried no written order naming Garrick. He did carry payment tokens issued through a merchant bank often used by Garrick's branch. Useful, not enough. Adrian kept the tokens. The battle produced another consequence. Celine Ward had seen Greybank defend a caravan under organized attack. Her report traveled through merchant circles faster than any advertisement Adrian could have purchased. More independent traders began asking about the river road. Garrick's bridge closure hurt less every week. When they returned to Greybank, Mara met the caravan at the yard and counted people before goods. She saw Adrian's cut knuckles, Bram's bandaged arm, and Kaya's bruised shoulder. Then she inspected the surviving medicine crates and asked how much had burned. Adrian told her. She exhaled through her nose. Expensive. We were attacked by 30 armed men, and that is your first concern? Were you going to become less injured if I complained first? He had no answer. Mara helped Leora carry the wounded inside. That night, the 4 of them ended up in the same kitchen long after everyone else had gone to bed. Leora rewrapped Adrian's split knuckles while warning him that a spear was not permission to use his hands as a shield. Mara put a covered bowl beside him and told him to eat before the broth cooled. Kaya sat opposite, with her bruised shoulder packed in cloth, and listened to Bram snore from the next room. Adrian started to open the account ledger. 3 different hands stopped him. He looked from Mara's rough fingers on the cover, to Leora's ink-stained ones, to Kaya's bandaged palm. This feels coordinated. It is, Kaya said. He ate the soup. Several days later, Inspector Elian Rusk returned. He had compared Greybank's barley and seed lines with samples from western districts affected by gray blight. Mara's crops were not immune. Under controlled exposure, they still sickened. But several of her selected lines resisted early infection noticeably better than the regional average. Rusk was careful not to overstate the result. Mara was even more careful. She asked how many samples, what humidity, what soil conditions, and whether the resistant plants shared parent seed. Rusk answered every question. Then he told Adrian he was sending a formal report to the Crown Agricultural Office. Adrian thanked him and returned to the debt ledger. The final payment was only weeks away. The first installment had reduced the original 1,600 crown principal to 1,480. By then, Greybank had already ring-fenced 1,244 crowns in completed earnings and paid advances. That reserve had been built from medicine wholesale, produce, flour, milling, market and road fees, preserved goods, and caravan contracts over 8 months. It did not include winter grain, next spring seed, worker shares, current payroll, or ordinary operating cash. Adrian had learned too much to pay a creditor by starving his own estate. 236 crowns remained. Signed autumn harvest lots were expected to bring 310 gross. 74 of that was already committed to harvest wages, sacks, carts, seed reserves, and settlement fees. The remaining 236 would close the debt exactly if Greybank delivered the contracted quantity. At last, the number at the bottom of the page was not hopeful arithmetic. It was a plan that balanced. If nothing major failed, Greybank could pay everything. Lord Garrick reached the same conclusion. Legal pressure had failed to stop trade. Bribery had failed to separate the family. Armed men had failed to destroy the caravan. He had one remaining advantage. The debt was due on a fixed day. Money expected after that day was useless. If Greybank's harvest, medicine stores, and trade stock burned immediately before settlement, Adrian might still own a prosperous estate, in theory, and lose it in law. So, Garrick stopped trying to make Greybank fail slowly. He began preparing to make it fail in one night. Adrian realized the final attack was coming because 3 small facts refused to belong together. The first was lamp oil. Master Pike mentioned, during market day, that someone had purchased nearly every cheap oil cask available in 2 nearby towns. The buyer claimed to be supplying a quarry camp that did not exist. The second was people. Kaya's patrols saw unfamiliar men near the southern woods, never more than 2 at a time, always leaving when challenged. Celine Ward reported that a group of armed riders had rented storage outside the district and paid in merchant bank tokens similar to those taken from the caravan officer. The third was Tyning. The strangers appeared 12 days before the debt settlement. Adrian spread the reports across the dining table and stopped treating them as separate annoyances. Garrick did not need to conquer Greybank. He did not need to kill Adrian. In fact, killing Adrian would be inconvenient, because a dead heir before legal foreclosure could send disputed land into temporary crown custody. The caravan officer's order to keep Vale alive showed Garrick still understood that. It also showed how far he had already moved from safe legal pressure. Professional attackers could be told not to aim for Adrian's heart. Nobody could guarantee he would survive fire, crossbow bolts, horses, and confused night fighting. Garrick was now willing to accept that risk because legal defeat was only days away. He needed Greybank intact enough to seize and unable to pay. That meant one target: value, harvest, medicine, stored grain, trade stock, records, cash. Fire could destroy all of it quickly. Adrian called the household together before sunset. He did not ask whether they believed him. Greybank had already survived 1 warehouse fire and 1 deliberate caravan attack. Mara walked the estate map with a finger and began identifying what could burn. Leora listed medical supplies she could move into the stone mill cellar. Kaya asked how many attackers Adrian expected. More than last time, enough to be confident. Bram rubbed his beard. Then we make confidence expensive. For the next 10 days, Greybank prepared without looking like a fortress. Mara divided the late harvest stacks into smaller groups instead of 1 large yard. She ordered dry weeds cut from wide strips around grain storage. She reopened 2 shallow drainage cuts that had been allowed to narrow during summer, and connected them to the old irrigation channel above the lower field. The strangest part of her plan involved water they did not currently need. She had workers clear an ancient wooden sluice above the east meadow. It had once diverted spring floodwater around the mill. Mara tested the gate twice, repaired its swollen frame, and marked the areas below that would turn to deep mud if opened after dark irrigation. Adrian asked how long the ground would take to soften. The lower track, 20 minutes. The meadow edge, perhaps 15. 10 carts cross before that. Our carts, yes, if they stay on the stone line. Mara looked toward the meadow. Not happily. Leora transformed her laboratory into something halfway between a clinic and a fire code violation. She prepared burn salve, clean bandages, boiled water, splints, pain tinctures, and several sealed blue smoke charges. She showed every defender how to wet cloth before entering the smoke. She also mixed bright signal powders that produced colored flame when thrown into braziers. Red meant fire near the storehouses. Green meant a breach at the west wall. Blue meant retreat toward the manor yard. Adrian asked whether the colors could be confused with the defensive smoke. Leora stared at him. Then she changed blue retreat to yellow and reserved white for outer posts reporting enemy movement. A fair criticism, she admitted. Kaya reorganized the guard into small groups that knew exactly which area they were responsible for. She refused Adrian's first plan for a continuous wall defense. We have too few people. If we spread along every fence, they choose the weak point, and we run after them all night. Instead, she created observation posts and protected cores, the mill, the medicine store, the main grain yard, the manor where civilians would gather. Paths between them remained open, so defenders could shift quickly. Bram trained villagers to hold short spear lines rather than chase attackers. Adrian moved the most important asset before anyone could burn it. Money for the debt left Greybank in 3 separate trips, disguised as ordinary market payments. Master Pike held 1 sealed portion in his town strongbox. Celine Ward's caravan office held another under contract. The final portion remained in a crown license notary vault near the settlement office. The debt documents moved too. Adrian placed copied ledgers and worthless sealed papers in the manor office chest. Then, he filled the chest with enough actual silver coin to make the deception believable. Mara objected to risking real money. A thief who finds nothing knows it is a trap, Adrian said. A thief who finds 10 silver is 10 silver richer. If the plan works, we recover it. If the plan fails, then I will apologize to the 10 silver personally. Mara remained unconvinced. The allies who returned did so for practical reasons, which made Adrian trust them more. 6 lumbermen came from the northern camp because Greybank's medicine had saved 2 of their brothers, and their manager wanted the river road kept open. They brought axes and long hooks used for moving logs. Celine Ward left 5 caravan guards behind after her final pre-settlement delivery. A secure Greybank mattered to her business. Master Pike arrived with 2 assistants, more bandages, and the complaint that Leora's medical station was arranged in the wrong order. Leora told him to fix it. He did. Jory and the village men came because their homes were inside Greybank's boundary. The blacksmith brought hammers, tongs, and a short spear he had forged for himself. Altogether, about 50 people could carry water, move wounded, watch a road, or hold a weapon. They prepared to protect the place that had begun feeding them again. The system offered Adrian no combat reward for any of it. When he looked at the 3 women moving through the yard, it showed only the same family analysis it always had. Mara Thorne's agriculture talent remained SSS, with 11.7% realized. Leora Pell's alchemy and medicine talent remained SSS, with 10.2% realized. Kaya Ven's martial arts talent remained SSS, with 14.9% realized. Small fractions of enormous ceilings, more than enough to change Greybank. The attack began on the 10th night. There was no moon. The first warning came from a dog barking near the south road, followed by the dull knock of a signal block from Kaya's outer post. 3 knocks. Multiple groups approaching. A runner reached the yard moments later with a rough count from 2 observation posts. More than 30 armed men were moving in separate groups, not including whoever remained outside the boundary. Adrian was already dressed. He stepped into the manor yard carrying a spear, and saw a white signal flame rise from the far pasture. Yellow was Leora's retreat signal. White belonged to the outer observation posts and meant armed movement had crossed a marker. An outer observer had used the pale flare to mark enemy movement. Then orange fire appeared beyond the lower field. The attackers had started with the crops. They threw oil onto the dry edge of a harvested strip and lit it in 3 places, expecting flames to race toward standing grain. Mara had cut the field into fire sections days earlier. The flames reached the first bare strip and slowed sharply. Villagers with wet sacks and shovels beat down the edges, while water teams worked from barrels placed before nightfall. The attackers had expected panic. Instead, the fire became loud and dangerous, without becoming decisive. A second group entered from the east meadow. Mara was waiting beside the old sluice with Jory. She did not carry a weapon. She carried a lantern and a wooden lever. When Kaya's runner confirmed that mounted men had passed the upper marker, Mara opened the gate. Water rushed into the restored diversion cut. It spread across the lower track in a dark sheet, then sank into soil already softened by evening irrigation. The first horses crossed before the ground changed. The next group did not. Hooves punched through the surface. One horse stumbled to its knees. Another turned sideways. Riders cursed and tried to force a faster pace, making the footing worse. Mara closed the gate after exactly the volume she wanted had passed. Jory stared at the struggling riders below. "How did you know?" "Because we spent 4 months fixing this land," Mara said. "I know where the water goes." She moved toward the next fire line before he could answer. The attack on the west storehouse was more serious. Mercenaries with shields rushed the short fence, while archers shot fire arrows over it. Kaya's guard did not defend the fence itself. They fell back to the stone lane between the storehouse and mill, where only 4 attackers could advance side by side. Bram held the front with 6 spearmen. Kaya moved behind them, striking wherever one of the mercenaries forced a gap. At that stage of her growth, ordinary hired fighters were no longer equal opponents, one by one. The first man who slipped past the spear line swung a mace at her head. Kaya stepped inside the arc, hit his elbow, and cut across the leather behind his knee. He fell before he understood the exchange. The second tried to shield rush her. She kicked the bottom edge, shifted his balance, and drove the pommel of her sword into his temple. She did not spend time proving superiority. Weak enemies received short answers. The problem was numbers and objectives. Every attacker she stopped in one place created pressure somewhere else. A red flare rose over the medicine store. Fire. Leora saw it from the manor yard. She did not run toward the fighting. That would have been useless. She sent the prepared fire team with 2 sand carts and stayed at the medical station as the first wounded arrived. One village guard had an arrow through the upper arm. A lumberman had been burned across his hands pulling a flaming cloth away from a grain stack. Another man had a deep cut at the scalp that produced terrifying amounts of blood without penetrating the skull. Leora triaged them quickly. Pike began cleaning the arrow wound. "Do not remove it yet," she said. "I know. You pulled one through in the camp. That arrow had already passed through." "I remember." "Then why did you say it?" "Because you looked impatient." Pike glared at her while wrapping a tourniquet above the wound. The injured guard started laughing and then regretted it. The west lane nearly broke at the same time. Adrian arrived with the reserve group and found Bram's spearmen giving ground under shield pressure. The attackers had learned from the caravan failure. Several wore cloth masks and eye coverings dampened against smoke. Garrick's hired commander had prepared 2. Adrian sent 2 men to the mill stair, not the lane. The higher position let them thrust down with long poles at attackers trying to climb the stone edge. Then he joined the center. His first opponent was better than the man from the caravan. The mercenary used a round shield and a short sword. He slapped Adrian's spear aside and moved aggressively inside the point. Adrian did not attempt Kaya's speed. He retreated 1 measured step, planted the butt of the spear against the mill wall, and let the man's own advance drive him onto the returning point. The spear entered below the shoulder. Adrian pulled it free and nearly lost the weapon when the wounded man seized the shaft. Bram kicked the mercenary away. "Hands!" The sergeant barked. Adrian adjusted his grip. Another attacker came. This one recognized the spear trap and cut at the shaft instead. Adrian shortened his hold, used the wood like a staff, and took a slash across his outer ribs when he mistimed the turn. The cut burned hot beneath his coat. He stayed upright. Months earlier, pain would have stopped his thinking. Now he knew enough to ask one useful question. Was the wound disabling? No. He continued. The enemy pushed into the lane. Adrian saw their real tactic only when a second group appeared behind the mill. The lane attack was holding Greybank's best defenders in place, while infiltrators moved toward the manor office, toward the chest. He almost smiled. Let them through the rear garden, he told Bram. Bram looked at him as if he had gone mad. The office? Exactly. Bram understood. The reserve shifted just enough to make the garden route appear weak. The infiltrators took it. Their leader was not the mercenary captain. It was Verdun Fane, Garrick's estate factor, the same careful man who had delivered the bridge order and attended creditor meetings over the previous months. He knew what debt documents looked like and which seals would matter during foreclosure. Adrian had hoped Garrick would send someone trusted enough to identify records. Verdun entered the manor with 4 men. Kaya's second reserve closed the garden behind them. They did not attack immediately. Inside, Verdun found the office chest. He broke the lock. He found copied debt documents, estate ledgers, seals, and 10 actual silver crowns. Then, the rear door closed. Kaya's guards arrested 2 men before the others understood the room had become a cage. Verdun tried to burn the papers. The papers had been treated with damp clay solution that made them smoke badly and burn slowly. Leora had found the idea amusing. Adrian had found it cheap. Verdun was captured with Garrick's payment marks in his coat, and a sealed instruction packet he had not expected anyone to search before the property changed hands. The packet was careful rather than stupid. It authorized Verdun to take emergency custody of specified pledged assets if the debtor attempted concealment, listed the medicine store and grain houses by inventory number, and instructed him to prevent unauthorized transfer if physical recovery became impossible. It also referenced payment to a hired security company through the same merchant bank used after the caravan attack. None of that sentence by sentence proved an order to burn Greybank. Together with armed men, oil, the previous bank tokens, and Verdun standing inside a broken office chest at midnight, it was enough to justify a serious investigation. Adrian preferred evidence that survived a lawyer. Garrick had written enough to control his people, while leaving himself room to deny what prevent transfer actually meant. Whether that room remained after witnesses spoke would be a question for court. But the night was not over. The mercenary captain realized the infiltration team had failed when no signal appeared from the manor. He entered the battle personally. His name was Captain Rowan Marr, a veteran of border wars with close-cut brown hair, a broken nose, and no interest in proving himself honorable. He carried a long saber and a narrow buckler. Unlike the previous officer, Marr had studied Kaya before accepting the contract. He knew the stories. He knew she learned patterns quickly, so he refused to give her patterns. Kaya met him near the mill race after driving 2 mercenaries from the lane. Her first exchange told her he was stronger than anyone she had faced. Marr attacked with a direct thrust, then abandoned it halfway and struck with the buckler instead. Kaya shifted to counter the saber that never arrived, and took the shield edge across her cheek. She answered with a low cut. He retreated on an uneven rhythm, 1 quick step and 1 slow, then lunged while she expected a 3rd retreat. The saber tip cut her upper arm. Kaya changed guard. Marr changed stance. She watched his shoulders for preparation. He deliberately moved them before false attacks. He threw a shallow kick, simply to disrupt her reading. Every time Kaya tried to learn the sequence, Marr destroyed the sequence. He had turned her greatest developing advantage into a source of hesitation. For several minutes, she lost. Not dramatically, incrementally. A cut at the arm, a bruising buckler strike to the ribs, a forced retreat across wet stone, a missed counter that left her breathing harder than he was. Bram saw the problem from the lane and could not help. 3 attackers occupied him. Mar smiled for the first time. They said you learned fast. Kaya said nothing. He feinted a downward cut and shifted his buckler toward her jaw. She reacted to the feint. Too early. The buckler struck. Kaya stumbled against the mill rail. Mar's saber came for her neck. She dropped under it and rolled into the mud below the rail. For one dangerous second, she was on one knee. Then, Bram's voice, from months of training, returned in memory, not as inspiration, but as irritation. Stop trying to win fast. Kaya stood. Mar changed rhythm again. This time, she did not chase it. She stopped trying to predict him. Her feet settled into the basic stance Bram had forced her to repeat thousands of times. Her shoulders lowered, her breathing shortened and steadied. Mar feinted. She held center. He changed stance. She kept distance. He flicked the saber toward her eyes, expecting the usual fast analytical response. Kaya made the smallest possible parry and returned to guard. Mar's expression changed. The battle became slower. That favored him in experience, but it also removed the trap he had built for her mind. Kaya no longer needed to know what he planned. She needed to control where his blade could reach. He pressed harder. She gave ground only when distance required it. He tried the buckler strike that had worked twice. Her rear foot was now where Bram had taught it to be. She shifted outside the shield instead of backward, and touched his sword wrist with a short cut. Not deep. Enough. Mar attacked again with a new combination. Kaya did not memorize the combination. She watched the one thing he could not change completely. Balance. Every attack moved his center somewhere. Every recovery had to bring it back. Her SSS understanding had not vanished. She had finally stopped asking it to replace fundamentals. Mar drove her toward the mill race with 3 different attacks, none repeated. Kaya blocked, stepped, breathed. On the 4th, he planted his forward foot on a wet patch of stone and shifted weight for a powerful diagonal cut. He had used no repeated technique. He had repeated a physical necessity. His rear heel lightened before the full weight transfer. Kaya moved at that instant. She did not attack the saber. She stepped inside its strongest arc, shoulder to shoulder, and caught Mar's buckler arm with her free hand. He tried to pivot. Her foot blocked the line. The same simple hip turn she had used on Dane Crow months earlier now carried a trained body behind it. Mar lost the center. Kaya drove him against the stone rail. His saber scraped sparks from the wall. She struck the thigh once, short and exact. The leg failed. Mar went down. Kaya's sword stopped at his throat. He looked up, breathing hard. You stopped learning. Kaya's cheek bled from the buckler cut. No, I learned the boring part. Bram heard that from 10 paces away. He shouted, "About time." Mar surrendered. His company broke soon afterward. Some fled. Others dropped weapons when they saw the captain down and Verdon's infiltration group being marched into the yard under guard. The remaining fires were extinguished before dawn. Greybank paid a price. 1 grain shed burned halfway through before the roof collapsed safely inward. Several rows of late vegetables were trampled. 2 guards suffered broken bones. One of them would be unable to work the fields for most of winter, so Adrian put his household on full guard compensation before anyone had to ask. A lumberman was badly cut and would need weeks before he could return north. Adrian's ribs required 6 stitches from Leora, who informed him that moving while she worked would increase the number. He stopped moving. No defender died. Most of the harvest survived. The main medicine store remained intact. The mill still turned. The money was nowhere near the battle. At sunrise, smoke drifted above wet fields, divided by clean fire breaks. The east meadow shone with standing water. Blue residue marked the stones near the west lane. Captured mercenaries sat under guard beside the stable. Mara walked through the damaged grain yard, counting losses. Leora slept sitting upright for 20 minutes before another patient woke her. Kaya leaned against the manor wall, while Bram wrapped her arm. Her ash-white hair was dark with sweat and mud, and the cut on her cheek had already swollen. Adrian stood in the yard, with a bandage around his ribs. his black hair stuck to his forehead, and a silver streak at his right temple, gray with ash, and watched the sun reach the repaired manor roof. 9 months earlier, Garrick's branches had selected 3 women because they seemed like 3 additional expenses. That night, Mara's knowledge of land had saved the fields and trapped an entire mounted approach in mud. Leora's preparations had kept wounded defenders alive, and her old failed blue mixture had broken enemy formations. Kaya had organized the estate guard and defeated the strongest fighters sent against them. None of it had happened alone. Adrian had built contracts, trade routes, alliances, reserves, hidden money, false documents, and the plan that let every part support the others. The 4 people who had arrived at Greybank as strangers had become a system more effective than the magical one only Adrian could see. Hooves sounded on the main road after sunrise. This time the riders carried legal banners. The settlement officers had arrived. So had Lord Garrick Vale. He had come to take possession of a bankrupt estate. Instead, he rode through the gate and saw his hired men in chains. Garrick dismounted slowly. The older man's control showed its first visible crack since Adrian had awakened in the family hall. It lasted only a second. His eyes moved from the burned grain shed to Captain Marr under guard, then to Verdun Fane with his hands bound in front of him. When Garrick saw the sealed packet on the settlement officer's table, the crack disappeared behind calculation. He did not accuse Adrian of staging the attack. That would have been foolish with 40 witnesses and wounded men still lying in the manor. Instead, Garrick asked whether Greybank could meet the debt. Adrian almost admired the discipline required to say it. The senior settlement officer, Magistrate Halvin, opened his ledger. He had no interest in family theater. The contract required payment before the end of that day. If Adrian paid, title remained with Greybank. If he did not, the seizure process began. The criminal evidence from the night would be handled separately. That separation suited Adrian perfectly. He never wanted his ownership to depend on proving Garrick guilty. "Proceed," Adrian said. The first settlement portion arrived from Master Pike's town strongbox, under 2 guards. It represented completed medicine orders and reserve cash placed there before the attack. The second came through Celine Ward's caravan office. Flour sales, preserved goods, bridge and route fees collected before the legal bridge suspension, and several merchant balances had been consolidated there. The third had already been deposited with the Crown Notary from mill income, market fees, produce sales, and paid commercial advances. Halvin verified the 3 protected deposits together at 1,244 crowns. Greybank's own mourning accounts supplied the remaining 236 from buyers, who had contracted the autumn harvest lots before the attack. 1 grain shed and several rows had been damaged. But Mara's divided storage and firebreak plan had preserved more than the contracted quantity. So Greybank could still deliver what had already been sold. Worker pay, winter food, seed reserve, and current operating cash remained in separate accounts and were not rated to manufacture the victory. The money did not fall from a dead enemy's pocket. It came from 9 months of vegetables, medicine, flour, tolls, markets, caravans, careful storage, and people who had learned to produce more than they consumed. 1,480 crowns remained after the first installment. 1,480 now stood on the settlement ledger. Magistrate Halvin counted by ledger and weight. Garrick stood 10 paces away. Mara stood near Adrian, with dried mud on her skirt. Leora had not changed out of her stained medical apron. Kaya wore a bandage across one cheek and another around her upper arm. None of them looked like anyone Garrick would have chosen for a noble family portrait. Adrian thought that made the moment better. The clerk finished the final column. Halvin checked it. Representatives of the other 2 creditor branches accepted their contracted settlement shares, signed releases, and made a point of stating for the record that they had authorized Garrick to administer recovery, not to hire armed men. Then, Halvin pressed the settlement seal into red wax. The debt is satisfied in full. All 3 creditor claims are discharged. Greybank Manor, its registered lands, bridge rights subject to Crown law, mill, and attached village, remain the property of Adrian Vale, and the registered Graybank household. Nobody cheered immediately. The sentence was too heavy for that. Adrian took the stamped release and read the first line himself. Paid in full. The words were disappointingly plain. He had expected something larger after 9 months of nearly dying for them. Mara asked to see the paper. He handed it over. She read the seal and touched the edge with one rough thumb. Then, her shoulders lowered in a way he had never seen. Leora looked at the document for perhaps 3 seconds before asking whether this meant the laboratory expansion budget could be reconsidered. Adrian turned to her. We finished paying the debt less than 1 minute ago. That sounds like a yes. Kaya looked past them at Garrick. Not finished. She was right. The debt was finished. Garrick was not. Magistrate Halvin turned to the evidence from the attack. Verdon's sealed packet linked the night operation to Garrick's estate office, but its wording alone was deliberately ambiguous. The merchant bank marks matched payments found on the captured caravan officer weeks earlier. The oil purchases and hired storage Celine had reported matched the mercenary company's movements. Captain Marr, facing charges for armed destruction of pledged property and attack on a registered trade route, confirmed that his company had been hired through Garrick's factor. He had not been ordered to kill Adrian. He had been ordered to destroy stores, disable trade, and seize estate papers if possible. Marr also testified that Verdon's instruction to prevent unauthorized transfer was the phrase used when the company was told to burn goods it could not carry. That testimony turned careful language into evidence of intent. Under creditor law, a lender could not deliberately destroy pledged property to force default. Doing so invalidated collection privileges and exposed the lender to criminal and civil penalties. Garrick attempted one defense. He claimed Verdon had exceeded authority and interpreted the order criminally on his own. Halvin did not decide the full criminal case in the yard. He did not need to. The packet, payments, repeated attacks, witnesses, and Marr's statement were sufficient to freeze Garrick's creditor authority and send the question to Crown Review. Garrick stopped speaking. He was not dragged away in chains on the spot. The law Adrian had relied upon for 9 months did not suddenly become theatrical because he was winning. Halvin placed Garrick under formal restriction from leaving the district pending Crown Review. His creditor branch lost all remaining authority over Graybank. Merchant accounts connected to the mercenary payments were frozen. Verdon and the captured officers were remanded for testimony. The criminal case would continue for months. For Adrian, the important part ended that morning. Even if Garrick somehow escaped prison, he could never again claim Graybank through the old debt. The land was safe. The village understood before the manor did. Someone near the gate shouted that the debt was paid. A second voice repeated it. Then the news ran down the road faster than any official announcement. By noon, people had brought bread, beer, smoked fish, 2 pies, and 1 goat to the manor yard. Adrian never discovered who thought a goat was appropriate celebration food, or whether the goat was a gift at all. Kaya assigned it a temporary pen until ownership could be established. Of course she did. They spent the next week repairing damage from the attack. The burned grain shed was dismantled. Salvageable timber went into a new, smaller store with stone partitions. Mara assessed every damaged field and replanned the late harvest. Losses hurt, but they did not threaten winter. Leora treated wounds until Master Pike ordered her to sleep and threatened to dose her with her own bitter fever mixture if she refused. She slept. Kaya's guards rebuilt the western fence and added 2 watch platforms based on lessons from the attack. Bram claimed this was exactly what he had recommended months earlier. Adrian remembered no such recommendation. Bram said Adrian's memory had been damaged by youth. The house returned to routine in pieces. That was when Adrian remembered his first night promise. The marriages had been forced by debt. The debt no longer existed. He could have allowed the question to fade. All 3 women had refused offers to leave before. They had shares in Graybank. Their lives were tied together by work, affection, habit, and 9 months of surviving problems no sensible household would have volunteered for. That did not make the promise less important. Freedom given only when nobody planned to use it was not freedom. Adrian called Mara Leora and Kaya to the dining room on a clear afternoon after the last settlement officer left. The table had been repaired twice. The ceiling no longer leaked. Sunlight came through proper glass windows. A new cabinet stood against the wall, though Mara had already filled half of it with field ledgers. Adrian placed 3 folders on the table. Each contained a dissolution agreement already signed by him, a final statement of personal property, the woman's accumulated profit share, and confirmation that the rights documents from earlier in the year remained valid where applicable. Mara read the first page in silence. Leora's face lost its usual restless expression. Kaya looked at Adrian instead of the paper. "You are free," Adrian said. "All 3 of you. The debt is paid. Garrick is finished here. If you want to leave Greybank, the notary will process it without another signature from me." He had imagined several versions of this scene while preparing the papers. In none of them did Mara ask the question she actually asked. "What about the East Field?" Adrian blinked. "What about it?" "The field beside the restored channel." Mara frowned, as if he were being deliberately slow. "Is it still mine to manage?" Understanding arrived. "If you stay, yes. I would prefer you manage far more than that." Mara closed the folder. "Then I have no reason to leave." She pulled the nearest agricultural ledger toward herself and began reading the next planting schedule. That was her answer. Leora remained still longer. She turned the dissolution paper over, inspected the seal, and then tapped one finger on the table. "If I stay, can the laboratory be expanded?" Adrian had known this was coming. "How much?" Leora spread both hands until they were nearly the width of the table. "No, you did not let me finish. You were measuring in walls, only 2 walls." "No." She considered him, then slid the folder away. "Fine. We will earn more first." Adrian narrowed his eyes. "Was that agreement to stay?" "Obviously. Who else will stop you buying furniture instead of useful glassware?" Mara looked up. "Furniture can be useful." Leora pointed at her. "You argued against pillows." They were expensive pillows. The 2 of them began discussing household spending, with the focus of diplomats dividing territory. Adrian turned to Kaya. She had not opened her folder. "You are free," he told her. "I know." She looked toward the yard, where 2 guards were practicing under Bram's supervision. Her sword rested against the wall, within reach. Then she looked back at Adrian. "That is why I am staying." Nothing more was required. Adrian collected the unused dissolution papers and placed them in the cabinet anyway. He did not tear them up. Choice was not a ceremony performed once. He intended the door to remain real. By late autumn, Greybank no longer resembled the place where 4 strangers had arrived in a hired wagon. The manor was not a palace. Adrian had learned how expensive palaces were and developed a mature hatred of the concept. But the roof was sound. Most windows had glass. The kitchen stayed warm. The granary held enough food for winter and seed for spring. The mill worked daily when the river allowed. A separate laboratory stood behind the manor, with a stone chimney, reinforced walls, and fire buckets. Leora was legally forbidden to move. The village had grown from a scattering of occupied houses to a community loud enough that Adrian sometimes missed the silence, though never enough to want it back. Children attended lessons, 3 afternoons a week, in an empty cottage. The blacksmith employed an apprentice. 2 new merchant families rented storage near the bridge. Celine's caravans stopped regularly on the river road, even after the bridge restriction was lifted with the debt. Mara managed fields large enough that she now required 3 assistants to maintain records. Farmers from outside Greybank came for seed, drainage advice, and arguments about soil. She remained small, copper-haired, freckled, and impossible to persuade into wasting food. The difference was that she no longer looked at a full pantry as if it might vanish by morning. Leora's teal hair was usually held back with whatever clip she could find, and her violet eyes grew bright whenever a new ingredient arrived. Master Pike referred difficult cases to her when he believed her analytical approach might help. She still caused minor laboratory incidents. Greybank had simply become better at containing them. Kaya wore her ash-white hair shorter after the final battle, because burned ends annoyed her. The thin scar through her eyebrow had been joined by a faint line on one cheek from Mars' buckler. She trained guards every morning, and herself every evening. Her system realization remained below 20%. Adrian found that comforting. If this was less than 1/5 of her ceiling, the world beyond Greybank remained very large. As for Adrian, he had gained no SSS talent and no magical strength. He had gained calluses, a respectable spear guard, better endurance, knowledge of grain contracts he had never wanted, 3 different methods for calculating caravan profit, and enough experience with legal documents to ruin dinner conversation. He was still not an elite fighter. Kaya could defeat him quickly in training. Bram could still make him look foolish if allowed to choose the drill. Adrian's advantage was elsewhere. He saw Tisas and asked what they could become together. That was why Greybank worked. 9 months after sleeping beneath a dining table because the bedroom ceiling had collapsed, Adrian finally decided he had earned one unreasonable luxury. He went to town and bought a chair. Not an ordinary chair. A proper upholstered office chair with carved arms, a high back, thick padding, and enough unnecessary workmanship to make Mara suspicious from across the yard. Adrian had it carried into his office. He settled into the padding, rested both arms on carved wood, and let the high back take his weight. For 11 quiet minutes, Adrian Vale experienced the noble life he had imagined since spring. The next morning, the chair was gone. He found it in Leora's laboratory beneath a complicated glass apparatus. "Why is my chair here?" Leora did not look up from her notes. The apparatus needed a stable platform at exactly that height. "It is a chair. An excellent chair. Very stable." She informed him that his office was temporarily needed for storing next season's selected seed because the new grain shelves were not finished. He found Kaya in the yard. "Tell them I need my office." Kaya considered the request with military seriousness. Adrian stared at the manor he legally owned. He began to suspect that the authority of a household head had been exaggerated by people who did not actually live with their households. Several peaceful weeks passed. Then a crown carriage arrived at Greybank. It was not grand enough for royalty. 2 mounted escorts accompanied a dark blue coach bearing the seal of the Royal Land Office. A woman in a charcoal traveling coat stepped down and introduced herself as Lady Merodane, a crown administrator with authority to negotiate emergency territorial contracts. Adrian's first thought was that government officials rarely traveled this far to congratulate anyone. His second was that the carriage contained a map case large enough to be expensive. He invited her inside. Mero declined wine, accepted tea, and asked that Mara, Leora, and Kaya join them. That alone made Adrian more attentive. She knew their names. The administrator opened the map across the dining table. Greybank appeared near the eastern edge of a small marked estate. The territory she wanted to discuss lay far to the west. It was enormous by comparison. The western county of Darson had been declining for years. 2 poor harvests had weakened reserves. Then, gray blight spread through grain districts and destroyed much of the current crop. Hunger followed. Ordinary disease spread through underfed villages. Abandoned roads attracted bandits. Several settlements near the forest line had been left almost empty, which allowed dangerous beasts to move closer to inhabited land. The previous appointed administrator had requested removal after failing to stabilize the region. The crown could send soldiers. Soldiers could clear a road and kill bandits. They could not make sick soil productive. The crown could send grain. Grain could prevent immediate starvation. It could not repair farms, establish local medicine, reopen trade, and keep the next harvest from failing. Mero placed 4 documents beside the map. The first was Inspector Elian Rusk's report on Mara's barley lines and Greybank's agricultural recovery. The second summarized medical outcomes from Leora's treatments, including confirmations from Master Pike and the logging camp. The third was a trade report showing that Greybank had reopened an independent commercial route after obstruction and maintained safe caravan passage. The fourth was the legal record of the recent attack, including Greybank's organized defense and the survival of its economic infrastructure. The crown is not interested in your family because of rumor, Marrow said. We are interested because you have already solved, on a smaller scale, 4 problems Darson now has at once: food, disease, security, administration. Adrian looked at the county boundaries. 9 months earlier, Greybank's debt ledger had felt larger than the world. Now his entire estate fit under Marrow's fingertip. What exactly are you offering? Temporary administrative authority. 3 years, reduced crown levy during recovery. Access to emergency grain reserves. A limited recovery fund. 2 crown clerks for records and tax reconstruction. And authority to hire local officials and organize defense under royal oversight. The crown will not rebuild Darson for you, and the recovery fund will not cover a fraction of everything the county needs. If your household restores minimum harvest stability, reopens the primary trade road, returns population to designated settlements, and brings the disease rate below emergency threshold, the crown will convert the territory into a hereditary county under your house. Leora was already reading the medical appendix. Her face became increasingly offended. These treatment records are terrible. Marrow glanced at her. That has been mentioned. No, I mean the records themselves. Half the villages do not separate fever by symptom group. This column combines infected wounds with lung illness. Who did this? 3 different local physicians. Leora stared at the page. They should be introduced to writing. Kaya ignored the medical papers and pointed to the main western road. Who controls this section now? 2 bandit companies, depending on the week. The old hill fortress here is believed to be occupied by the larger group. Kaya's mouth moved into the faintest smile. Good. Marrow looked at Adrian as though checking whether that reaction was normal. Adrian chose not to explain. Mara had said nothing. Marrow opened the sample case, included with Rusk's report. The live diseased stems remained sealed behind waxed glass for quarantine. A separate pouch contained soil that Rusk's office had heat-treated, so its structure could be examined without carrying viable blight into Greybank. Mara rubbed a little of that soil between her fingers, checked the grit and texture, then asked where the sample had been collected and how long the field had been abandoned. Marrow answered. Mara looked back at the map. The land is still alive. Adrian's attention returned to the map. If Mara believed the soil still had structure worth saving, then the agricultural side of the crisis was difficult rather than hopeless. He studied the territory again. There were dozens of villages, miles of road, a fortress, rivers, sick fields, empty farms. People who would not trust a new administrator simply because the crown sent one. Bandits who had built livelihoods from collapse. Physicians with poor records. Warehouses, mills, bridges, taxes, winter supply, spring seed. It was unreasonable. It was dangerous. It was expensive. Adrian felt a familiar interest begin to replace caution. He looked at Marrow. What do we get if we succeed? Everything inside the marked county boundary, subject to crown law and levy. Silence settled around the dining table. 9 months earlier, Adrian had owned a broken manor, a nearly dead mule, and enough money for a depressing lunch. 3 creditor branches had forced him to take 3 poor wives from their registries because they believed hunger would finish what debt had started. Now Mara was measuring a dying county by its soil. Leora was already rewriting questions for the medical survey. Kaya was studying a fortress held by bandits. Adrian looked at Greybank on the map, then at Darson. The idea that his family could restore an entire county should have sounded insane. It did not. He tapped the western road. We will need the Crown's current population records, last 5 years of harvest estimates, bridge conditions, tax arrears, physician locations, grain reserve access, and every report you have on those bandit companies. Marrow's eyebrows rose slightly. Adrian looked at his 3 wives. Mara had already taken out a pencil. Leora had stolen Marrow's medical appendix and was writing in the margin. Kaya was still smiling at the fortress. He turned back to the administrator. That is the price of finding out how expensive yes will be. From the laboratory came a muffled crash. Everyone at the table stopped. Leora looked toward the door. That was probably fine. Adrian closed his eyes. The Crown administrator waited. Mara quietly wrote laboratory repairs into the margin of the preliminary budget. Kaya stood to investigate. Adrian opened his eyes again and looked down at the map of a county large enough to swallow Greybank several dozen times over. Then he smiled. The relatives who had tried to ruin him had given him 3 wives they considered worthless. What they had actually given him was a farmer who could teach dead land to feed people again, a healer who refused to accept bad answers, and a warrior who had turned freedom into strength. Adrian had given them space, resources, ownership, and a reason to build beside him. Together, they had turned 11 silver crowns and a collapsing roof into a home nobody could take from them. A dying county was only a larger set of problems. This time, they would not begin as strangers.